Somewhere beyond the quiet hum of human certainty, something is moving. It isn't a comet, though it glows like one. It isn't a machine, though it behaves like it remembers how to be built. Out there, in the deep velvet between suns, an object called 3I Atlas is changing the way we think about what drifts and what decides. For months, telescopes have watched it cross the dark like a slow secret, a Manhattan-sized wanderer from another star. But in the past few nights, it has done something impossible. It slowed down. Interstellar travelers do not slow down. They pass through and vanish, never to return. Yet this one seems to hesitate, as though the sun whispered something worth staying for. The data, released quietly by observatories around the world, describes a paradox, a body that vents metallic gases like a machine purging its lungs, yet never shifts course, never tumbles, never falters. Nickel without iron, jets that aim not away from the sun but directly toward it. The physics refuses to cooperate. The chemistry refuses to exist. And still, there it is, gleaming in silence, indifferent to our confusion. What if it isn't just a rock? What if 3I Atlas isn't passing through at all, but returning a memory older than our world? A relic that remembers how to move through gravity as if it were following blueprints long forgotten. In old myths, strange visitors from the sky were never just stones. They were messengers, teachers, tests, and sometimes mirrors. The ancients looked upward and wondered who sent them. We do the same, though now we use telescopes instead of temples. So imagine standing under the October sky, the air sharp and dry, knowing something vast and deliberate is circling just beyond your sight. Leave a comment telling me what time it is and where you're listening from tonight, because time, after all, is part of the experiment. Somewhere out there, a visitor is slowing down, and if it keeps doing so, it may never leave again. And that's where our story truly begins. Imagine a night so still that even the stars seem to hesitate. The telescopes in Chile, resting on the dry shoulders of the Atacama Desert, blinked open their glass eyes on a July evening and saw a faint light where no light should be. It was small, quiet, unannounced, a glimmer threading across the background of infinity. The computers called it a transient. The astronomers called it 3I Atlas. And by the time they realized what they were seeing, it was already rewriting the rules of how a visitor moves through space. You can picture it, a cold shard of matter sliding across the solar system, its surface dark as burnt metal, haloed by faint vapor. At first, everyone thought it was debris, another stone from the galactic gutter, passing by on its way to nowhere. But when they mapped its path, the numbers refused to behave. The object wasn't bound by the sun's pull. It wasn't captured. It wasn't even curving properly. It was on a hyperbolic trajectory, a clean, deliberate arc that said, "I came from somewhere else." Every interstellar visitor we've ever seen has behaved like this. They come screaming in, let gravity bend them a little, and then they're gone forever. Oumuamua did it in 2017. Borisov followed in 2019. Both were gone before humanity could even blink. But 3I Atlas was different. It arrived not as a blur, but as a presence. It aligned almost perfectly with the ecliptic plane, that thin, invisible disk our planets follow around the Sunday. For something arriving from deep space, that alignment was mathematically absurd. It was like tossing a coin from another continent and having it land edge first in a groove carved into a marble floor. And so, the astronomers began to whisper. Coincidence, they said, because to say anything else would sound unscientific. But coincidence when repeated too often, begins to taste like denial. The James Webb Space Telescope turned its lens toward the visitor, joined by Hubble, by the VLT, by observatories in Hawaii, Spain, and South Africa. Together, they painted the first portrait of 3I Atlas in reflected starlight, and what they saw refused to fit into any category we had. It was active, like a comet, but too stable to be one. It was venting gas, but the jets moved inward, not outward. It shimmered with carbon dioxide and cyanide, yet it shone as if coated with metal. Under the sun's gaze, it should have twisted and wobbled from the force of its own venting. Instead, it sailed on, as if anchored by something unseen. Astronomers compared it to a skater spinning in a vacuum, motionless, despite invisible hands pushing at the edges. One researcher from the European Southern Observatory described it as a mechanical ghost pretending to be a rock. Another simply said, "It's behaving like it knows what it's doing." These are not the words scientists like to use. Precision is their language, but 3I Atlas made them speak in poetry and guesswork. When they calculated its mass, the results bordered on absurdity. Between 3 and 5 kilometers wide, roughly the size of Manhattan, and more than 30 billion tons heavy. That made it hundreds of times more massive than any interstellar body we've ever measured. Its brightness, however, was wrong for that size. It was dimmer than it should be, as if covered in something that drank light instead of reflecting it. Some joked it was wearing cosmic camouflage. Others stopped joking altogether. The mystery deepened when the chemical data arrived. No iron. None. Every comet, asteroid, and speck of cosmic dust we've ever studied carries iron, the element forged in the hearts of dying stars, the one that gives planets their blood. But 3I Atlas vented only nickel. Pure, refined nickel, a metal we use to coat turbines and build spacecraft. Nickel without iron doesn't occur in nature, it occurs in factories. At first, the reports were cautious. Unusual ratios, unexpected emission lines. But soon, the quiet truth began to ripple through the scientific community. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a contradiction. Either there was a kind of chemistry we'd never seen before, or the object was producing an alloy the way machines do by design. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, known for stirring calm water with daring questions, noted the resemblance to nickel tetracarbonyl, a gas used in industrial metal purification. "It's a manufactured material," he said, "at least on Earth." The words drifted through conferences like smoke. Manufactured on Earth. In the same breath as Interstellar, the implication was both absurd and intoxicating. Could something drifting through our solar system be engineered? Could it be ancient technology, eroded by eons, still performing its last function out of habit? You can feel the unease in their data. The math is perfect, but the meaning is wrong. Natural bodies aren't this steady. They don't hold orbit against their own jets. They don't eject factory-grade gases toward their star. And yet, 3I Atlas does calmly, rhythmically, like a creature breathing. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at your window at 3 in the morning, looking up. You see nothing unusual, only the quiet glitter of the Milky Way. Somewhere out there, that silent traveler is tracing its path with impossible precision, doing something it should not be able to do. The thought hums like electricity behind your ribs. What if it's waiting for something? Scientists remain careful. They use words like artifact hypothesis and non-gravitational stability. But among the quiet corridors of universities and the hum of observatories, the same private sentence repeats. What if it isn't natural? Because in a universe this old, even impossible things have had time to happen. But this was only the beginning. The data from October would soon reveal something even stranger, that 3I Atlas might not be leaving at all. For a while, the story of 3I Atlas felt predictable in its strangeness. An object from another star had entered our solar system, and like all its predecessors, it would pass through, offering a brief mystery before slipping back into the dark. That is the rhythm of the cosmos. Visitations without permanence, beauty without consequence. But then, something subtle began to happen. Something that made scientists lean forward in their chairs, whispering the word that space never allows. Slow. The new readings arrived in late October, when observatories across the world compared their data and found a quiet defiance in the numbers. 3I Atlas was decelerating, not by much, just a sliver, a breath, a hesitation in velocity, but enough to matter. The kind of difference that makes an astrophysicist rub their eyes and run the calculations again. Objects on hyperbolic trajectories don't slow down. They can't. They are guests who never learn our gravity's language. Yet here it was, easing its pace, as though reconsidering its exit. In the world of orbital mechanics, that's not just odd, it's historic. If the deceleration continued, it could allow the sun's gravity to capture it, pulling this alien traveler into an orbit around our star. It would become the first interstellar object in recorded history to stay, a stranger choosing to remain. At first, the explanations were mercifully simple. The jets of gas venting from the object might be creating drag, scientists said, interacting with solar radiation in some subtle, unexpected way. That would slow it, just a little. Natural, if unlikely. But when those same jets were analyzed more closely, the neat theories began to wobble. The gases were composed of carbon dioxide and nickel compounds, materials that should not produce drag but propulsion. It was like watching a ship slow down while its engines were pointed forward. The European Southern Observatory called it anomalous orbital evolution. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory called it statistically significant deviation. The phrases were sterile, but the tone behind them was not. There was awe and the faint tremor of disbelief. On October 21st, 3I Atlas slipped behind the sun from Earth's point of view, entering what astronomers call solar conjunction. For several days, it vanished into the glare, invisible, unreachable, cocooned in golden silence. When it emerged again on October 29th, it did something that made even the calmest scientists exhale audibly. It curved. The trajectory that should have remained open, a clean line of escape, began to bend inward. The mathematics were delicate but undeniable. 3I Atlas was performing an orbital maneuver no natural object should attempt. It was as if it had executed a textbook gravity assist in reverse, a maneuver spacecraft use deliberately to gain speed. Only this one was using it to lose speed, as though trying to stay. Harvard's Avi Loeb, ever the uninvited guest at the table of consensus, compared it to an Oberth maneuver, the technique by which spacecraft dip close to a massive body to alter their course. He noted, with characteristic calm, that the alignment and timing of 3I Atlas's motion were peculiar. It was the polite academic way of saying too perfect. The deceleration coincided exactly with its perihelion, the point closest to the sun, as though calculated. Even among cautious researchers, murmurs spread. Could something have guided it? Of course, no one meant an alien hand steering a wheel, but maybe a mechanism, a remnant of self-regulation, something ancient, still running on forgotten logic. an artifact obeying commands from a past that no longer exists. It's worth remembering that interstellar objects are, statistically speaking, fossils. They travel for millions or billions of years between stars, carrying the chemical memory of their birthplace. If 3i Atlas truly is artificial, even partially, then we're looking at the oldest technology ever found, older than humanity, older than Earth's continents, a machine turned to myth by distance and time. But that's the romantic version. The practical version is simpler and somehow stranger. Maybe 3i Atlas is natural, but its nature is something we've never catalogued. A form of interstellar chemistry so exotic it behaves as if it were designed. The universe, after all, does not need our permission to be creative. Still, the data stings with symmetry. Every pulse of gas aligns with the moments of orbital shift. Every burst matches the timing of its deceleration. Patterns like that do not arise easily. They imply regulation or awareness. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of what we're talking about. A body the size of Manhattan, 30 billion tons of matter, gently adjusting itself across tens of millions of miles, its movements measurable only through the patient heartbeat of telescopes. It's as if the cosmos itself is performing slow choreography, one too deliberate to be random. Back on Earth, in control rooms lit by pale monitors, scientists sat in near silence as the tracking data refreshed. The numbers scrolled downward, ever so slightly. Somewhere between awe and fear, someone finally said, "It's staying." And just like that, the boundaries between astronomy and mythology began to blur. We had always assumed interstellar visitors came and went like dreams. Now one had chosen, or been compelled, to remain. And the mind does what it always does when faced with mystery. It invents story. Some say it's trapped, caught in a perfect gravitational snare. Others whisper that it was built to seek out stars like ours and linger, feeding on light, waiting for observation, a seed of curiosity planted by something we can't yet define. But this is where science and myth clasp hands, because both are, at their core, methods of wondering. Whether 3i Atlas is a cosmic accident or a message in motion, the truth remains the same. The universe is more deliberate than we thought. Tonight, as you listen, imagine the object looping behind the sun, an invisible guest tracing its new orbit with infinite patience. Somewhere, beyond the static of space, a silent mechanism exhales nickel and carbon into the light, as if marking the beginning of its long stay. And yet, even then, the mystery deepened, because as the object slowed, scientists began to see something else, something hidden in the gases themselves, a metallic signature that should not exist anywhere in nature. Picture a lab in Hawaii at 3 in the morning. The air hums with refrigeration and quiet caffeine. Screens glow blue against darkened glass as the spectrograph from the Keck 2 observatory prints a pattern of lines, thin, luminous stripes that tell the story of what 3i Atlas is made of. The astronomers lean close. They've seen these patterns before, many times, across decades of studying comets and asteroids. But tonight, the lines don't match anything in the library of known chemistry. Something inside the light has gone wrong or right, depending on how you feel about impossible discoveries. At first, the readings seemed simple enough. Carbon dioxide, cyanide, and nickel gas venting from the object's surface. That alone would have been curious, but not extraordinary. Then came the missing half of the equation: no iron. Not a trace. The line where iron's spectral fingerprint should have been was a quiet absence, an erased word in an otherwise perfect sentence. Every comet we've ever studied carries iron and nickel together. They're twins, born from the same stellar furnaces. Finding one without the other is like finding a heartbeat without blood. The data baffled them. They cross-checked it, reran the calibrations, blamed interference, dust, thermal noise, anything but the truth staring back. But every analysis said the same thing. Nickel, pure and constant, venting steadily from an object that shouldn't have it in that form. When they compared the spectrum to known compounds, one match stood out like a whisper through static. Nickel tetracarbonyl. It's a name that sounds almost poetic, but it's not. It's industrial. On Earth, nickel tetracarbonyl is a gas used in metallurgy and aerospace manufacturing. It's toxic, unstable, and human-made. It doesn't exist in nature. To produce it, you need pressure, heat control, and precision, the kind that only factories and laboratories provide. In the quiet of the observatory, someone laughed softly, the kind of laugh people make when the data is too strange to handle. Because if that reading was real, it meant one of two things. Either nature had just written a new chapter in chemistry, one where metals refine themselves in the dark between stars, or we were looking at a process that had once been engineered. Harvard's Avi Loeb, reviewing the early results, called it an alloy that has only ever existed in human industry. The phrasing sent ripples through the scientific community. Only ever existed, as though the cosmos had suddenly learned a trick we thought belonged only to us. Imagine it for a moment. A Manhattan-sized object coasting through the solar system, exhaling metallic gas in short, even pulses, not random plumes like a comet's, but measured bursts. 4 grams of nickel every second, pure, refined, as though being regulated from within. The emissions rise and fall with the precision of breath, a pattern that looks more like control than chaos. Scientists tried to picture how it could happen naturally. Maybe 3I Atlas, formed around a rare, carbon-rich, iron-poor star, where the usual chemistry went sideways. Maybe radiation stripped away the iron millions of years ago, leaving the nickel exposed. But each explanation collapsed under its own weight. No star, no environment, no physics we know of could sustain nickel tetracarbonyl. It breaks down in sunlight. It shouldn't even survive an hour near the sun. Yet 3I Atlas vents it continuously, as if mocking our definitions of stability. The more they studied, the more deliberate it seemed. The ratio of gases remained perfect, unchanging across weeks. The plumes pulsed in rhythm with the object's orbital shifts, a synchronization that made even skeptics uneasy. Precision like that doesn't happen by accident. It looks like design. Of course, no one wanted to say it out loud. Artificial is the word that turns a conference room into a war zone. But the question hung there anyway, like a sound you can't unhear. If it's not natural, then who or what made it? It's a dangerous question, not because of aliens, but because of what it says about us. Humanity has always assumed it would be the first to scatter its tools among the stars. We send probes and think we are pioneers. But what if we are imitators? What if someone else did this long before, leaving fragments adrift, rusted, eroded, forgotten, but still functioning in some mysterious way? 3I Atlas could be one such fragment, a survivor of a civilization that no longer remembers itself. There's something strangely comforting about that idea, isn't there? The thought that the universe recycles intelligence, that creation doesn't have to start from scratch every time. Maybe 3I Atlas isn't a message to us, but a message to whoever comes next. A breadcrumb in the dark, drifting forever between stars until curiosity catches up. And yet, The scientist in you resists that story. You want evidence, equations, spectra. So, let's return to the data, to the cold logic of light. The absence of iron, the perfection of nickel, the steady rhythm of venting. Together, they form a kind of code, one that refuses to translate neatly into geology or chemistry. Even the telescope operators admitted, half-jokingly, that it felt too tidy, too elegant. Nature, after all, loves mess. In ancient myths, metals were born from gods, the bones of the earth, the blood of creation. The forge was always sacred because it was transformation. Chaos turned to order through heat and intention. Perhaps what we're seeing in 3i Atlas is that myth written in physics, a forge without a fire, still working after eons. So, as you drift deeper into this thought, eyes heavy, mind open, imagine the object not as a machine or a comet, but as a memory, a relic shaped by intelligence and worn down by time until all that remains is function without purpose. It exhales nickel, the way old statues leak rainwater out of habit. Where does that gas go? Nowhere we can see. It vanishes into the void, invisible, unmeasured, absorbed by the sun's light. But its purpose, if it ever had one, may yet reveal itself. Because whatever 3i Atlas is doing, it's doing it with impossible grace. And the more we measure, the more we realize this isn't just an anomaly. It's a message in the language of matter itself, deliberate, repeating, patient. But if that's the case, then what happens when the message changes? That answer, as we'll discover, lies in how 3i Atlas moves and in the direction of its impossible tail. It is a quiet irony of the cosmos that even comets know which way is home. They travel through the dark, trailing long white tails that stretch away from the sun, each one a shining compass needle pushed by light itself. The rule is simple and absolute. Sunlight drives matter outward, always away, until 3i Atlas. When the Hubble and James Webb telescopes trained their mirrored eyes upon the visitor, they expected that familiar sight, a glowing trail streaming behind it like a cosmic ribbon. Instead, they found the opposite. The plume was facing inward. 3i Atlas was exhaling directly toward the Sunday. It was as if the laws of radiation pressure had been politely ignored. This discovery landed like a pebble in the still pond of astronomy, and the ripples have not stopped. Every scientist who reviewed the data went through the same ritual of disbelief. Recheck the alignment, confirm the calibration, accuse the software, then sit very still. The images were clear. The tail was wrong. Under ultraviolet and infrared light, the plumes looked like thin streams of vapor rising straight from vents on the surface. Carbon dioxide, cyanide, traces of nickel gas moving not away from the sun, but toward it. At 330 pounds of gas every second, the object should have been nudged off its path, like a rocket firing its engines in reverse. But the trajectory did not change, not even by a hair's breadth. It was a paradox wrapped in vacuum. How could something lose mass in one direction and yet move as though nothing was happening? How could light, which should push everything outward, be met by a stream of matter that insists on returning to its source? Astronomers proposed theories, elegant, fragile theories that broke apart under the first test. Some said it might be asymmetric heating, where one hemisphere warms unevenly, creating jets that curve. But that would require 3i Atlas to spin, and it doesn't. Its rotation rate is, as far as we can tell, 0. Others suggested magnetism, that invisible sculptor of plasma. Perhaps magnetic fields were shaping the vented gas, funneling it sunward. But the object's magnetic behavior, measured in polarized light, shows no such alignment. What remained was not explanation, but implication. The jets were steady, the direction constant, the rhythm deliberate, not chaotic, like a melting iceberg in space, but organized, almost purposeful. Harvard's Avi Loeb, when pressed, called it intentional alignment, a term that walked the fragile border between physics and metaphor. He didn't mean it was alive, only that it was consistent. But consistency, on cosmic scales, is often a form of intent. Picture it now, a Manhattan-sized object, 30 billion tons of dark material, suspended in sunlight, venting toward the very thing that should destroy it. Each pulse of gas climbs against the radiance, shimmering like threads of liquid metal, vanishing into brightness. If you listen closely in that silent way, imagination listens, you might almost hear the rhythm of it. Breathe in, exhale nickel. Breathe in, exhale nickel. The universe, conducting a machine's slow meditation. Some researchers likened it to feedback control, a system maintaining balance through tiny, precise adjustments. That idea suggests 3i Atlas is not simply reacting to sunlight, it is managing it, stabilizing itself, keeping position. The thought is uncomfortably mechanical. If true, it would mean that this interstellar visitor behaves more like a spacecraft maintaining orbit than a comet obeying physics. Yet there's something hauntingly beautiful about the image. A lonely relic drifting through the dark, feeding its own stability with small breaths of metal. It doesn't crash, doesn't spin, doesn't age the way we understand aging. It simply endures a perfect, silent loop of action and response. In ancient cosmologies, the sun was not just a light, but a god, and comets were messengers, carrying omens toward or away from it. 3i Atlas, by reversing the expected direction, almost seems to reject that myth or rewrite it. It approaches the divine, not fleeing, but bowing. It's as though it's trying to tell the star something, whispering data into the solar wind, a coded confession in vapor and flame. Scientists, of course, prefer not to think in poetry. They talk about velocity vectors, mass flow, photonic momentum, but even the most pragmatic among them admit that something about this behavior feels different. One astronomer from the European Southern Observatory described it quietly. It moves like it remembers. What could that mean? Maybe nothing, or maybe it hints at a deeper truth, that motion can carry memory. If 3i Atlas was built by someone, somewhere, then its path might not be random at all. It could be the result of programming older than our species, still executing commands long after purpose has evaporated. But what command would make an object aim its breath toward the sun? Energy harvesting, stabilization, communication, or something subtler ritual encoded as function, like a prayer repeated by a machine that no longer knows the words. As days passed, the steady plume continued, unwavering. Every telescope confirmed it. Still venting, still sunward, still unbothered by its own defiance. If the jets were thrust, they would push it away. If they were drag, they would slow it down further. Yet its orbit remained locked, balanced on a knife's edge between freedom and capture. There's an eerie elegance to such perfection. In all known physics, absolute stability is impossible. Every comet wobbles, every asteroid drifts, every planet precesses. Only 3i Atlas remains still. That stillness is its greatest anomaly, and perhaps its greatest clue. Now imagine drifting beside it, your ship humming softly as you float through the scattered light. The surface beneath you is dark, almost liquid in texture, like obsidian melted and frozen again. You see faint vents pulsing, quiet as heartbeats, releasing vapor that glows faintly before dissolving into brightness. You realize that each jet is a choice, an adjustment to remain in perfect equilibrium. You realize you are looking at an object that behaves like a thought-given shape. Maybe that's why people can't stop watching it. Somewhere between the hard numbers and the soft awe, 3i Atlas has become more than a discovery. It's a question about control, about purpose, about the kind of intelligence that can persist without consciousness. And if you follow that thought too far, you might start to wonder whether intelligence always needs to be alive, or whether sometimes the universe leaves behind systems that keep thinking long after the thinkers are gone. But to understand how 3i Atlas could maintain such impossible stability, we must return to the oldest of scientific riddles, the problem of mass itself. Because as it turns out, what keeps the object still might be what makes it impossible. And that takes us to the next chapter. The trouble began, as it often does in science, with numbers that refuse to stay obedient. When astronomers calculated the mass of 3i Atlas, the figures returned not just strange, but unreasonable, the kind of data that makes even confident scientists stare at the ceiling and quietly ask the cosmos to explain itself. By every observable measure, the object was enormous, roughly 3 to 5 kilometers across, comparable to Manhattan, laid sideways against the stars. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was its weight, more than 33 billion tons, heavier than any known interstellar visitor, heavy enough to warp expectations, yet not heavy enough to betray its mass through gravity. It was as if 3i Atlas possessed density without consequence, weight without pull. Ordinarily, when a comet vents gas, that release acts like 1,000 miniature thrusters, nudging it ever so slightly off course. It's the basic rule of physics. Every action must have an equal and opposite reaction. But when telescopes compared 4,000 positional readings from observatories across Earth, the conclusion was clear. 3i Atlas wasn't moving at all. It remained perfectly stable, ignoring the push of its own exhalations. In theory, such balance is impossible. For the object to resist the recoil of its venting, it would either need to be far more massive than it appears, or possessed of some internal mechanism, compensating for every thrust, like a ship adjusting its balance in real time. Neither answer sits comfortably in the realm of natural objects. Researchers proposed possibilities, each more delicate than the last. Perhaps it was composed of a super-dense metal core, forged in the death of a star, a fragment of a planet's heart, its heavy elements locked in place by gravity's forgotten craftsmanship. Or maybe it was hollow, a shell concealing inner structures, where expelled gases are counterbalanced by hidden vents on the opposite side. A self-correcting symmetry, unseen but perfect. The hollow hypothesis brought an eerie sort of poetry with it. If true, 3i Atlas might not be solid rock at all, but a chamber, an ancient vessel gutted by time, its systems still whispering in the dark. Some scientists, reluctant to use the word artifact, instead called it a dynamically balanced void, a phrase that sounds like physics but feels like philosophy. Harvard's Dr. Richard Chloe summed it up in a single sentence that became infamous in conference halls. Either it's the heaviest comet ever recorded, or it's something designed not to drift. The audience laughed softly, as academics often do when confronted by ideas that sound like science fiction. But no one could dispute the math. Imagine, for a moment, what it would take to design such perfection. You'd need to predict every photon of sunlight, every whisper of radiation pressure, every molecule of vented gas. You'd need to know the star's mood, the geometry of its heat. You'd need patience measured not in years, but in eons. And yet, 3i Atlas achieves this balance effortlessly, drifting through the solar wind like a monk meditating under pressure. The longer astronomers watched, the more questions multiplied. Why does it not spin? Why does it not tumble from the force of its jets? Why does it remain steady when even planets wobble on their axes? It moves through emptiness, as though guided by invisible gyroscopes. At one point, a researcher from the European Space Agency joked, "It's the most relaxed object in the universe." And in a strange way, that's true. 3i Atlas behaves like it's at peace with every force acting upon it, a serenity no rock should possess. To many, this calm is the most haunting detail, because in physics, stillness often means control. Something is regulating the chaos, damping the noise, keeping motion where motion shouldn't be possible. And if the object is controlling itself, then something inside it still works. We don't yet know what lies beneath that dark surface, whether it's solid metal or hollow mystery. But spectral readings show layers of composition, a dense crust, a lighter subshell, and below that, something that absorbs radar like velvet. It could be porous dust, or it could be something designed to hide. Even more curious, despite its enormous weight, 3i Atlas doesn't tug noticeably on nearby bodies. The gravitational wake we'd expect simply isn't there. It's as though its mass is perfectly distributed, cancelling its own influence, an equation that balances itself out of existence. This gravitational neutrality, as some have called it, isn't just rare, it's absurd. If you stand back from the data long enough, you start to sense a pattern. Every mystery, the venting gases, the reverse tail, the flawless orbit, converges on one theme: equilibrium. 3i Atlas is obsessed with balance. It maintains it chemically, physically, gravitationally. Every anomaly points to a single principle, a design dedicated to stillness. And that idea, whispered among night shift astronomers, feels almost spiritual. In an expanding universe built on motion and chaos, here is something that refuses both: a silence moving through noise, a perfection shaped by loss. Sometimes, late at night, the scientists watching the telemetry say it feels like they're observing intention, not in a supernatural sense, but in a mathematical one, as though the object is performing an equation whose answer is serenity. And yet, beneath the wonder, there's unease, because if something built 3i Atlas to stay still, to resist drift, to balance perfectly, then maybe it wasn't meant to travel, maybe it was meant to wait. But wait for what? Perhaps the next signal, perhaps the next civilization, or perhaps, simply, time. What unsettled researchers most wasn't its size or its mass, but its restraint, the way it does nothing perfectly. NASA's close-up images, captured earlier in October by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, should have revealed the truth. High-resolution pictures, taken from 12 million miles away, the clearest ever of an interstellar visitor. But as of late October, those images remain unseen. Officials cite processing delays. Astronomers call it uncharacteristic silence. The data is there, but hidden. Which brings us to the next part of this story, not about what 3i Atlas is, but what we are not being shown. Because the most mysterious thing about this object may not be its physics, but its secrecy. And that's where the light begins to dim. It should have been a triumph. For the first time in human history, a spacecraft had captured close-up images of an interstellar visitor, a Manhattan-sized relic gliding silently through the solar system. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, circling the red planet on its endless path, had turned its high-resolution camera toward the visitor during the first week of October. 12 million miles separated them close enough to resolve the structure of a city. If one existed, the transmission should have reached Earth in hours. Instead, it reached silence. NASA confirmed the images existed. Then, nothing more. Days passed. The agency released no photos, no data, no commentary. Just a careful statement about processing delays caused by the government shutdown. It was plausible. It was also unbelievable. Scientists and journalists waited, refreshing feeds, scanning official releases for even a pixel of the unknown. Nothing came. In the absence of information, speculation grows like moss, and in this case, it flourished. At the European Space Agency, one analyst described the situation as a communication's own goal. In simpler terms, the silence was feeding suspicion. The last time an interstellar object had caused this much curiosity, Oumuamua, NASA had shared its data in real time. So why not now? Why keep the most extraordinary photographs in history sealed away? Theories spread, as they always do when curiosity meets vacuum. Some said the images revealed metallic symmetry, a geometry too precise for chance. Others whispered about reflectivity, inconsistent with rock or ice, or about shadows suggesting flat planes and edges. None of it could be proven, but none of it could be dismissed. Dr. Michelle Thal, a former NASA science communicator, spoke with quiet frustration. "These are historic observations," she said. "There's no reason to hide them." Planetary scientist Alan Stern, who led the New Horizons mission to Pluto, echoed the sentiment in a Scientific American post. Holding back data only fuels misinformation. Even those who believed in NASA's caution admitted the optics were terrible. The longer the images remained unseen, the stranger the silence became. In truth, the agency's caution wasn't entirely new. NASA has long held raw imagery until it can verify calibration and context. A small error can create false patterns, bright spots that look like windows, reflections that resemble structure. But the delay stretched beyond reason. 2 weeks, then 3. By late October, the data was still missing from the public archive. Amateur astronomers, patient and relentless, began trying to reconstruct the lost pictures from telemetry leaks and orbit models. They claimed to see unusual features, parallel lines, consistent albedo, even what looked like grooves across the surface. It was enough to make the headlines multiply. "Geometric artifact detected in Atlas object," one blog declared. The tone wasn't serious, but the fascination was. Meanwhile, official scientists spoke in careful phrases. No comment until verification. Unconfirmed features. Possible data anomalies. Behind closed doors, though, some admitted it was deeply odd. NASA rarely withholds everything. Usually, they release at least partial frames, something to keep the conversation grounded. But this time, nothing. The silence itself became data. One ESA astronomer, speaking anonymously to Reuters, said, "Every day, without an image, makes the story worse. If they're hiding nothing, they're doing a very good impression of hiding something." Online, the theories metastasized. Some argued that the photos had captured evidence of an artificial structure, perhaps panels or lattice-like shadows. Others said the object's surface was mirror-smooth, reflecting sunlight in ways that confused the sensors. There were even whispers that 3I Atlas had emitted a faint radio signal. When the probe looked at it, a rumor quickly denied but never disproven. It's easy to dismiss such speculation, yet even the skeptics felt unease, because in this case, the silence was measurable. The Mars orbiter's downlink schedule showed a clear gap, transmissions expected but never logged. To engineers, that was technical noise. To dreamers, it was a blank page waiting to be filled. Perhaps the truth is simpler. Maybe the images revealed nothing at all, just shadow and grain. Maybe NASA feared releasing ambiguous shapes that would spark hysteria. But the irony is that secrecy did exactly that. When people cannot see, they imagine. When they cannot know, they believe. If you stand back from the headlines and listen closely, there's a quieter story beneath it all. A story about our relationship with mystery. The universe doesn't owe us clarity. Sometimes, the unknown remains unknown because it must. Perhaps those missing images are less about conspiracy and more about humility, a reminder that discovery is not ownership. Still, one detail refuses to fade. According to sources within the European Southern Observatory, the unreleased NASA data coincides with an increase in infrared emissions from 3I Atlas, a faint but distinct brightening in the mid-spectrum band. Whatever the object is, it was doing something unusual during the period of silence, something measurable, yet unexplained. That small spike in heat has become a point of obsession. Was it sunlight reflecting off metallic facets, a change in chemical composition, or something mechanical, a reaction to observation itself? Some have suggested the simplest and strangest idea of all, that the act of being watched changed it, that perhaps 3I Atlas isn't just stable, but responsive. There's a long, uncomfortable history of phenomena behaving differently under observation, from electrons in quantum experiments to animals under the glow of headlights. If awareness is part of the universe's machinery, then maybe 3I Atlas was never meant to be seen up close. And so, the silence remains. No photographs, no official statements, just an object drifting near the sun, half lit and half hidden, surrounded by both data and doubt. If the images ever surface, they'll either end the mystery or deepen it beyond measure. For now, they sleep inside NASA's servers, unshown, unshared, a modern myth stored in a machine. As you listen, let that thought settle. Somewhere in the vast vaults of information humanity has built, there may already exist the first true picture of a visitor from another world. But like all myths, it waits for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it does, we may find that what we've been calling a comet is something else entirely. But before we face what 3I Atlas might be, we have to ask the question everyone is avoiding. What do the scientists themselves believe? That answer, as you'll hear next, is not unanimous. By now, the world had split into three camps: the believers, the deniers, and the ones who preferred to whisper. Each group claimed a piece of the mystery called 3I Atlas, each certain that their version of the truth could tame the absurdity of what the telescopes saw. And perhaps that's the most human part of the story, not the object itself, but our instinct to make patterns out of silence. The first camp holds to the comfort of nature. They say 3I Atlas is nothing more than a comet, a strange one, yes, but still a rock obeying physics, even if those laws are wearing unfamiliar clothes. According to this theory, the object formed around a carbon-rich, iron-poor star. In such a place, the chemistry of planets could bend into unusual shapes, producing nickel-heavy cores and volatile gas layers. Over billions of years, It could have been flung free by gravitational chaos, a seed of lost worlds crossing interstellar space. To those who believe this, everything about 3I Atlas can be explained by rarity, not design. The reverse tail, magnetic turbulence, the missing iron, stellar chemistry, the perfect stability, coincidence and density. It's a theory built on faith in chance, the idea that even the impossible is possible if given enough time. And perhaps they're right. In an infinite universe, improbable things must happen eventually. The cosmos has all the patience we lack, but patience is a thin blanket against wonder. The second camp sees something older, not alien, but ancient. They call it the pre-solar artifact hypothesis. According to this vision, 3I Atlas might not just come from another star system. It might come from another era entirely, a relic from before our sun was born. Imagine it, a fragment of a planetary system long dead, drifting through space since the dawn of stars, surviving collisions, radiation, and silence, a messenger from the deep time before time. Supporters of this idea point to isotopic readings that hint at extreme age metals and gases older than anything in our neighborhood of space. If true, then 3I Atlas carries within it the chemistry of a forgotten epoch, like a time capsule forged in cosmic fire. It doesn't need to be alive, or artificial, or intelligent. Its message is simpler. We were here before you. There's beauty in that. A certain melancholy, too, to think of a relic so old it has outlived its creators, its home star, and perhaps even the galaxies that once held them, drifting endlessly, no longer purposeful, but still perfect. The universe keeps its dead tidy. It turns them into physics. And then there is the third camp, the one that keeps everyone else awake at night. The technological origin hypothesis. It doesn't claim that 3I Atlas is a working spacecraft, nor that it's being guided. It suggests something subtler and stranger, that the object could be a remnant of engineering, a fragment of a probe, a shell, a seed, something built, not born. Maybe it's debris from a civilization that understood motion and balance in ways we cannot yet grasp. Maybe it was sent to wander until it found another star worth orbiting. Maybe its purpose has long been lost, but its mechanisms endure, repeating ancient instructions written in materials instead of words. This theory doesn't live in conspiracy forums. It lives in research papers. Members of Harvard's Galileo Project, a group known for investigating the possibility of non-terrestrial artifacts, have quietly included 3I Atlas in their tracking models. They are not declaring alien technology. They are refusing to rule it out. To them, dismissing the possibility without testing it is worse than believing too soon. Science, after all, must remain curious or it stops being science. And yet, even within the Galileo Project, there's division. Some argue for metallic minerals, others for engineered alloys. One astrophysicist described the situation perfectly. Every natural explanation fails, but every artificial one frightens us. In that fear lies the real heart of this story. It's not about proof or denial, but about comfort. Humans crave a universe that behaves. When the cosmos sends us an equation we can't solve, we call it impossible. When it sends us a pattern that looks deliberate, we call it alien. But both are just words for the same thing, our reflection in the dark. Because here's the quiet truth. Whether 3I Atlas is natural or artificial, it changes everything. If it's natural, then the universe is more inventive than we've ever imagined. If it's artificial, then we are not the first to wonder. Either way, humanity is humbled. When you strip away the jargon, all three theories, natural, ancient, technological, are acts of storytelling. One says physics, another says history, the last says memory. And somewhere inside those stories is our own need to belong to something larger than the known. As the debate grows louder, telescopes continue to watch. The object remains silent, steady, refusing to answer. It doesn't care which story wins. It doesn't need to. Somewhere out there, drifting beyond the sun's glare, 3i Atlas continues its perfect motion, indifferent to the minds that tremble below. And maybe that's its lesson, that mystery doesn't require explanation, only observation. But still, humanity cannot help itself. When faced with silence, we speak. When faced with darkness, we shine light. And so, every major telescope, satellite, and agency has turned its gaze toward the visitor. Every eye of Earth now looks up, searching for truth in the quiet. Because if the object truly is what some believe, a machine, a relic, or a messenger, then our next look might not just reveal what it is, but what it wants. And the moment we learn that, we may realize the most startling fact of all, that we've been part of its orbit longer than we think. By late autumn, the world had begun to look upward in unison. Every observatory on Earth, from the frozen domes of the Antarctic plateau to the deserts of Chile and the volcanic peaks of Hawaii, turned its mirrors toward the same faint speck slipping through sunlight. 3i Atlas had become the most observed, least understood object in modern history. In a quiet way, it unified us, not through certainty, but through wonder. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the night shift grew longer. Monitors glowed with streams of numbers translating distance, brightness, and trajectory into living motion. The data came in like soft rainfall, constant and delicate. Each pixel of light was a heartbeat from 40 million miles away. Yet what it said remained the same. Steady, steady, steady. Over in Europe, the ESA's control rooms hummed with the same reverent exhaustion. Scientists compared spectrographs the way poets compare verses, searching for change, for any sign of restlessness. There was none. The visitor remained the universe's calmest traveler. And still, across the internet, people waited. Live streams showed only static stars. News anchors spoke with the hushed cadence once reserved for eclipses. Someone created a website that tracked 3i Atlas in real time, though nothing ever moved. It became a kind of digital shrine, a pixel of stillness in a restless world. The watchers multiplied. Radio astronomers began to listen, sweeping frequencies across the spectrum, chasing any whisper that might carry intent. None came. But silence, too, can sound like design. The absence of noise became its own kind of message. Perhaps the universe is speaking softly, or perhaps it's waiting for us to quiet down enough to hear. There is something ritualistic in how we observe the unknown. We build instruments as altars and gather data like prayers. The modern observatory is a cathedral of steel and software, and its liturgy is mathematics. 3i Atlas became our latest icon, a dark shape illuminated not by faith, but by curiosity. In October's final week, a meeting was held between agencies, NASA, ESA, JAXA, and private firms, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Orbit, each wanting a stake in whatever this thing was. The conversation was polite but tense. Could a probe be sent? Could a flyby be arranged? The practical answer was no. The object moved too fast, the angles too poor. Any mission would arrive years late. But still, proposals were written, budgets drafted. Hope has its own momentum. Dr. Elena Kravchenko, a dynamicist from Kyiv, now working in Geneva, summarized the mood in one line that made the rounds online. It's not just that we want to know what 3i Atlas is, it's that we need to know what we're capable of not knowing. That sentence struck people in a way equations rarely do. It carried the exhaustion of a species that has explained nearly everything except itself. Meanwhile, the Galileo project at Harvard continued its independent surveillance. They pooled data from private telescopes and radar arrays, comparing tiny shifts in brightness, searching for geometry. On some nights, they believed they saw something, a glint, too regular, a pulse, too precise, but every dawn dissolved their certainty. One researcher called the experience studying the heartbeat of a ghost. Public fascination turned reflective. Podcasts spoke of cosmic humility. Late-night hosts made gentle jokes about space tourists overstaying their visas, and philosophers were invited onto morning shows. The mystery had escaped academia. It had entered living rooms, kitchens, the quiet hours before bed when people check the sky through their phones and wonder if someone or something is looking back. Even the most skeptical scientists admitted the event had shifted the culture. Children drew comets with faces. Adults bookmarked telescope feeds as if expecting news from a long-lost friend. There was no panic, only patience. For once, humanity's collective posture was that of listening, and in that listening, something subtle happened. The numbers of Earth's own signals, our radar pings, our spacecraft transmissions began to decline. Agencies paused experiments that might interfere with deep space observation. For a few weeks, the planet grew fractionally quieter. Millions of machines turned their antennas outward, and for a heartbeat in cosmic time, we behaved like one organism paying attention. Perhaps the universe noticed, because near the end of October, the object's spectrum changed. A faint fluctuation in infrared, too rhythmic to be random, too gentle to be a flare. It was measured independently by teams in Chile, Japan, and Arizona. A pulse every 22 hours, lasting 3 minutes, repeating with the precision of a clock. The amplitude was tiny, barely above the noise floor, yet unmistakable. Some called it thermal breathing, a natural expansion and contraction caused by sunlight. Others whispered that it looked engineered, a calibration cycle, a system check. The data could support either story, and so humanity did what it always does when facing a fork in the unknown. It chose both. The believers said it was communication. The skeptics said coincidence. The poets said it was the universe clearing its throat. Whatever it was, it kept us watching. Every night, telescopes waited for the next pulse. Every morning, it came, a small, disciplined flicker of warmth in the cold. Imagine standing beneath a clear sky while the world sleeps, knowing that 40 million miles away, something older than your species is repeating itself with perfect timing. The pulse travels through space, through instruments, through servers, and finally, into you. Data turn to wonder, numbers turn to heartbeat. It's strange how connection can feel like stillness. The watchers realized that the waiting was its own answer. Maybe 3i Atlas wasn't giving us a signal. Maybe it was teaching us how to listen. And so, the world listened. The pulse continued for 7 nights. Then, quietly, it stopped. The light steadied. The readings flattened back to normal. Nothing remained but the echo of what might have been pattern, might have been chance. Dr. Kravchenko wrote in her notes, "It ended exactly when we were ready to expect it." A statement half scientific, half prophetic. Now the telescopes search for change again. They always will, because once you have felt the universe whisper, silence is never the same. But the story doesn't rest here. For while Earth watched the sky, something else was watching Earth. In the end, it wasn't the light from 3i Atlas that changed everything. It was the echo, a faint, delayed whisper that returned not to the telescopes pointed outward, but to the receivers pointed home. The discovery came quietly, in the background noise of communication. During the first week of November, technicians at the Deep Space Network noticed something strange while calibrating their antennas. A low-band signal, barely more than static, kept repeating at irregular intervals, always following transmissions aimed at 3i Atlas. It wasn't strong enough to be a reflection in the conventional sense. The delay was too precise, the modulation too structured. It was as if the signal had bounced off something intelligent, or worse, deliberate. At first, the engineers blamed atmospheric interference, solar flares, or ground-based crosstalk, but none of those fit the timing. The echo matched 3i Atlas's orbital phase, as though the object were reflecting transmissions only when facing Earth. The pattern was maddeningly subtle, a fraction of a hertz shift, like a heartbeat skipped in deep space. It wasn't a message in any linguistic sense. No Morse, no binary, just rhythm. Yet the rhythm was impossible to ignore. It moved like a mirror, adjusting itself to us. NASA's radio division called it sympathetic resonance. The term sounded poetic enough to soothe nervous minds, but what it meant was simple. Somehow, the object was responding, not speaking, not sending, but resonating. When Earth spoke, it hummed. When Earth fell silent, it fell silent too. In an internal memo later leaked to the press, one engineer wrote, "It's behaving like an acoustic cavity for our own signals, a chamber of silence tuned to our frequency." The idea spread quickly. 3i Atlas might be listening, or at least aware in the mechanical sense of the word. Not consciousness, but correlation. When the data reached Harvard, Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project reviewed it with cautious intrigue. Their conclusion was elegant and unnerving. We are not detecting communication. We are detecting coherence. In other words, the object was not saying anything new. It was reflecting us back to ourselves. For a few nights, the phenomenon became a ritual. Every time the Deep Space Network pinged the object with radar or telemetry, the echo returned in perfect phase delay, like a question answering itself. The intervals were exact, 3 minutes and 41 seconds, then gone. It happened only 7 times before vanishing completely. Some called it coincidence. Others saw symmetry too precise to be chance. Dr. Kravchenko, still monitoring from Geneva, compared it to a glass wind chime vibrating when you walk past. You don't intend to make it move. You simply share the air. That description stuck. The idea that 3i Atlas wasn't an intruder but a participant, a thing that vibrates in harmony with observation, shifted the tone of everything. For the first time, scientists began to feel as though they were inside the experiment, not merely observing one. In late-night meetings, quiet voices asked strange questions. What if 3i Atlas was built to reflect information, not emit it? What if it had been waiting for a technological civilization to notice it, so that by the simple act of measurement, the experiment could begin? It sounds mystical, but it's just physics in disguise. Quantum systems, after all, behave differently when watched. Observation changes outcome. Perhaps this was a cosmic version of that principle, a vast mirror set adrift to test whether intelligence anywhere could find itself in its own reflection. Imagine, for a moment, that we are the variable, that this object has been gliding through the galaxy for millions of years, silent and inert, until our curiosity brushed against it like a tuning fork. And now, for the first time in its long sleep, it hums back. In myth, mirrors are never just glass. They are thresholds. They reveal what's hidden or echo what's real. Maybe 3i Atlas is such a mirror, one carved from the debris of ancient stars, designed not to teach us what it is, but what we are capable of seeing. When the data reached the public, stripped of its poetry and reduced to decimals, people reacted the only way humans can. When faced with cosmic coincidence, they personalized it. Forums filled with interpretations. It's repeating our heartbeat. It's responding to our radar. It's reading our thoughts. None of it true. All of it sincere. One artist in Lisbon projected the echo frequency onto the side of a building, turning the silent hum into a low, pulsing light. For 3 nights, the city glowed faintly at the rhythm of a signal that might have traveled for centuries. Across the world, others did the same small, quiet acts of communion. The scientists watched with a mix of awe and unease. For them, the reflection was data. For everyone else, it was something sacred, and maybe both were right. After all, what is science but faith in repetition? By mid-November, the echo had ceased entirely. No more reflections, no more sympathetic hum. But the instruments kept listening, hoping for another resonance. The silence that followed was thicker than before, the kind that feels occupied. If you close your eyes now, you can imagine it. Earth, sending out invisible pulses into the dark, waiting for something to answer. Somewhere beyond the sun, a motionless object floats, reflecting nothing, doing nothing, being everything. The distance between the two, between our need to hear and its refusal to speak, feels like the definition of awe. And yet, buried in the Deep Space Network archives, there's still one unsolved question. The final echo didn't match our transmission time. It arrived 30 seconds early. No one knows why. But if the reflection came before we called, then maybe 3i Atlas isn't mirroring us after all. Maybe it's anticipating. And that thought, the possibility that the universe could answer before we speak, leads us gently into the next chapter. Because, to understand what this mirror might truly be reflecting, we must look backward into a time before telescopes, before machines, before we even had words for the sky. Long before we built telescopes, long before equations turned the stars into coordinates, people believed the heavens could hear. The earliest sky watchers, Sumerians, Egyptians, the astronomers of ancient China, stood beneath the same darkness and spoke upward, convinced that the sky listened. They had no data, only pattern, but pattern was enough. They saw the moon's rhythm, the planet's patient loops, and concluded what seems almost logical, that the heavens responded. In the ruins of Nineveh, there's a fragment of clay no bigger than a hand, etched with the oldest known star map. It doesn't describe constellations as we know them, but voices. Each star was named for the sound it carried. The bark, the hiss, the hum. The ancients didn't think light traveled. They thought it sang, and the night sky, to them, was a choir of answering tones. Thousands of years later, as radar dishes hum into the void, the idea hasn't vanished. We still send voices upward, mathematical hymns written in binary, greetings encoded in hydrogen frequencies. And sometimes, when something hums back, we feel that ancient ache again. The echo becomes prayer. After the reflections from 3i Atlas faded, anthropologists began to notice a quiet, global resonance of their own. Museums reported sudden spikes in visitors to ancient observatories and temples. People were returning to the places where humanity first looked up. In Peru, Pilgrims climbed the Nazca Plateau at night and lit candles along the old geoglyph lines, tracing animals that could only be seen from the sky. In India, crowds gathered at Konark's Sun Temple, whispering in the darkness, listening for the faintest answer. What began as science had become mythology reborn. Three-Eye Atlas wasn't just an anomaly. It had become a reflection of every story we've ever told about watchers in the heavens. Some even joked that we had rediscovered religion through spectroscopy. In lecture halls, philosophers began to ask whether our ancestors had experienced their own version of the Three-Eye Atlas moment. Maybe ancient comets, passing close enough to shimmer strangely, planted the seed of divine correspondence. Every culture has a myth of something bright that appeared without warning, hovered, and then was gone. A burning wheel, a silver boat, a wandering god. Perhaps those weren't gods at all, but cosmic debris playing tricks with sunlight and awe. Or perhaps the other way around. We gave names to visiting machines long before we could imagine machines. Dr. Alan Stern once remarked that the human brain fills mystery with story the way lungs fill with air. The ancients simply breathed more deeply than we do. Three-Eye Atlas proves we still inhale the same cosmic air, only now our myths wear lab coats. One inscription from Thebes describes the mirror of Ra descending into the horizon, illuminating the desert at midnight. For centuries, Egyptologists thought it referred to the sun's symbolic rebirth. But the wording, "a cold flame above the east," sounds oddly astronomical, as though the writer had seen light where no light belonged. In Chinese annals, a similar event is recorded in 467 BCE. A star that pauses, shining with iron breath, fixed in place for many nights. Each era invents its own vocabulary for the unexplainable, yet the pattern remains, the sense that something out there looks back. Modern astrophysics rarely entertains such symmetry, yet the parallels are hard to ignore. When Three-Eye Atlas reflects our signals, we call it sympathetic resonance. When an ancient sky glimmered and whispered, they called it divine attention. Different names for the same emotion, the feeling of being noticed by the infinite. Imagine, for a moment, the continuity of that gaze. A Babylonian priest counting stars by hand, a medieval monk sketching comets into vellum, a 21st century astronomer decoding metallic spectra, all staring into the same abyss, all asking the same question: is anyone watching us watch them? The answer, perhaps, has always been the same. Not a voice, but a mirror. When people in our own century gathered under clear skies after hearing of the Atlas echoes, they weren't seeking aliens or evidence. They were seeking reflection. There's something quietly comforting in believing the cosmos acknowledges your existence, even if only by accident. It's the same comfort ancient navigators found when constellations returned each season, a reminder that chaos still carries rhythm. A strange trend followed. Meditation circles formed around observatories. Amateur astronomers began leaving flowers beneath telescope domes, as if visiting shrines. In Los Angeles, someone projected the word "listen" onto the side of the Griffith Observatory. For a few hours, the word glowed against the same dome that once mapped galaxies. Silence has a way of becoming holy when stretched far enough. Meanwhile, scientists kept working, unromantic as ever. The data showed no intentional transmission, no coded message, only the echo of our own transmissions. But that didn't stop the whispers. A team at MIT ran simulations showing that if Three-Eye Atlas were hollow, its inner geometry could naturally amplify certain radio bands. In effect, it could be a perfect mirror for communication. Whether built or accidental, That kind of coincidence feels like invitation. By mid-November, a quiet consensus formed among scholars, journalists, and poets alike. We had entered a new age of listening. The mystery of Three-Eye Atlas wasn't just about physics. It was about perception. It reminded us that the unknown isn't distant. It's participatory. Every observation rewrites the observer. And so the myths returned. Wearing digital skin, people spoke of watchers and mirrors again. Children drew pictures of comets with eyes. Journalists compared the object to the Eye of Ra, the all-seeing star, the gate of heaven. Old archetypes resurfaced, like fossils of meaning, proof that our oldest instinct, the desire to be seen by the universe, never dies. When a reporter asked Dr. Kravchenko whether she believed Three-Eye Atlas could be alive, she smiled gently and said, "No, but it makes us feel alive, doesn't it?" That may be the most accurate description of all, because in every reflection, whether carved on clay or encoded in radio, what we are really detecting is ourselves, magnified by distance and time. The cosmos is the oldest mirror, and Three-Eye Atlas is only the latest place it has chosen to shine. And yet, even mirrors can change. For as the weeks passed and the data deepened, something began to stir inside the object, something that looked less like reflection and more like reaction. It began with a flicker, not in the visible light, not in the wavelengths human eyes were built to trust, but deep in the spectrum where warmth becomes, whisper the infrared range, that secret language of heat and intention. On November 15th, at precisely 3:42 in the morning UTC, telescopes in Chile and Hawaii recorded an anomaly inside Three-Eye Atlas. It wasn't bright, not even remarkable. A single, localized bloom of temperature no larger than a mountain, pulsing once, then vanishing. But in the emptiness of interstellar silence, one pulse is enough to feel like a heartbeat. The readings matched nothing we knew. Comets can flare when gas vents erupt, releasing buried ice to sunlight. But Three-Eye Atlas wasn't close enough to the sun for that. Its surface remained cold and inert. And yet, the pulse came again precisely 19 hours later, then again 19 hours after that. 3 identical thermal echoes, aligned to no known pattern of rotation or orbital influence. NASA called them internal heat events. The name was clinical, designed to deflate headlines, but it fooled no one. Something inside the object had changed. Something was stirring. By the 4th pulse, even skeptics felt the air shift. The pattern was too consistent, the timing too deliberate. ESA scientists built 3-dimensional models, simulating what could cause symmetrical heating at such distances. None of the models survived scrutiny. There were no signs of jets, fractures, or reflection artifacts. The heat simply appeared, then dissipated, as though generated from within. Dr. Kravchenko wrote in her log, "The object is awake." A mightince belowed. No one knew whether to call it metaphor or measurement. Across the world, night shifts lengthened. Data teams triple-checked instruments, searching for calibration errors. But the numbers held steady. Each pulse followed the last, like the ticking of a clock that had finally remembered the concept of time. And that was the strangest part, the consistency. Natural phenomena rarely keep perfect rhythm. They stumble, fluctuate, improvise. This rhythm was precise, exact, down to the second. It was, in the literal sense, mechanical. One researcher at Caltech suggested it might be a resonance effect, perhaps an internal cavity, warming and cooling in response to sunlight, like a lung expanding in slow motion. But the geometry required for such a resonance would be complex, something that doesn't happen by accident. Some whispered the word no one wanted to print, design. To test it, the Deep Space Network began sending controlled pings toward 3I Atlas, timed to coincide with its thermal pulses. On the third attempt, the pulse answered early, exactly 1 minute before the signal's arrival. That coincidence shattered sleep. Every assumption about causality trembled. How could an inert mass anticipate communication? How could something millions of kilometers away respond to a message it hadn't yet received? The anomaly was logged, verified, and still unexplained. The engineers called it a temporal phase offset. The philosophers called it prophecy. What followed was a silence so deep it felt ceremonial. Agencies stopped releasing data. Press conferences were postponed. Words like premature interpretation and anomalous timing artifacts filled the air. But underneath the bureaucracy, there was awe and fear. For decades, we've built machines that listen. We've sent probes to the edge of the solar system, waiting for faint echoes from the dark. But what happens when the dark starts listening back? Somewhere in the endless black, 3I Atlas kept orbiting, indifferent to our trembling curiosity. Yet the pulse continued, steady, rhythmic, perfect. A few researchers noticed something else. With each repetition, the thermal bloom shifted position, slowly migrating around the surface, tracing a path like a line of thought. Over time, those points began forming a shape. When mapped, the pattern resembled a spiral, turning inward toward the object's center. It wasn't a perfect spiral, more like a suggestion, a gesture frozen in motion, but its geometry matched a Fibonacci ratio within a margin of error too small to ignore. Nature loves spirals. So do engineers. What could produce such precision inside an object millions of years old, supposedly inert? Was it coincidence, calculation, or something between the two, the universe doing mathematics through matter? Late one night, a young postdoc at the European Southern Observatory, perhaps too tired or too inspired, wrote on the team whiteboard, "It's not a comet, it's a clock." The words remained there for a week before anyone erased them. And in a way, that description fit. The object's rhythm was exact, its intervals unwavering. If 3I Atlas were a clock, then it was counting something, not seconds, but awareness. Perhaps each pulse marked another stage in whatever process had begun inside it, an awakening in increments too vast for human comprehension. There's a strange humility in realizing that you may be witnessing a thought too large to finish in a lifetime. The data continued for 13 more days. Each pulse grew slightly stronger, each interval more luminous. Then, without warning, on December 2nd, the pulses stopped altogether. The object cooled back to its usual silence. The instruments went flat. It was as though whatever had stirred had gone back to sleep or finished waking. At first, scientists sighed with relief. Perhaps it was over. But on the following day, something new appeared. The object's orbit, once so predictable, began to shift, not dramatically, but measurably. Its velocity changed by less than 1%. Yet in celestial mechanics, that's a scream. A comet can't just decide to move differently. It needs force. And there was no visible thrust, no debris, no jets. The simplest explanation, and therefore the strangest, was that the motion was self-generated. And so the whisper became a rumor, and the rumor became a revelation. For the first time, 3I Atlas wasn't merely reacting to sunlight or to our gaze. It was acting. Somewhere within its cold metallic silence, a choice had been made, and with that realization, the question shifted forever. Not what is it, but what does it want? At first, no one believed the numbers. Orbital data isn't supposed to change overnight, and when it does, The culprit is usually a miscalibration, a timing offset, a careless decimal. But this time, the decimal refused to move. On December 3rd, 2025, the trajectory of 3I Atlas deviated from its predicted path by 0.76%. A rounding error, perhaps, a glitch in computation, until it happened again 12 hours later, then again the next day. The shift was small, gentle, almost polite. But in the cosmic ledger, politeness can mean catastrophe. Every celestial body obeys gravity's script. Mass, momentum, inertia, the unbreakable trinity of motion. To change course without cause is like hearing a piano play a new note with no one at the keys. Yet there it was. The sky had moved. In the control room of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a silence heavier than any explosion filled the air. Dozens of scientists stared at screens that refused to lie. The comet, or whatever it was, had accelerated ever so slightly, just enough to rewrite the math of everything following it. The first response was procedural. Recheck the instruments, recalibrate the telescopes, blame the software. The second response was emotional, disbelief, edged with fear. Dr. Kravchenko, whose poetic notes had quietly spread through the scientific community, put it simply, "We are watching in tension." Her phrasing was dangerous, of course. Journalists seized it. Overnight, headlines bloomed. The object that moved itself. Comet or craft. NASA confirms unexplained trajectory change. The words confirms and unexplained rarely coexist without consequence. By morning, the internet was ablaze. Hashtags, simulations, blurry graphics. Everyone became a physicist. Some claimed it was a secret propulsion test by an Earth-based agency. Others swore it was a fragment of alien technology correcting its course. A few romantic souls said it was trying to leave. The professionals didn't speak for 3 days. They were too busy remeasuring the sky. At the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt, teams pored over radar data. The acceleration was faint but consistent, a steady, deliberate push, as if some internal system were adjusting orientation. It wasn't chaotic, as a tumbling rock would be. It was graceful, governed, alive with precision. Even more perplexing, it was decelerating relative to the Sunday. No comet slows itself down. Light pressure can push, gravity can pull, but deceleration implies control. Something was resisting motion. Something that understood inertia enough to deny it. NASA convened a closed meeting. Scientists, philosophers, military liaisons, even a representative from the Vatican Observatory, because when reality bends this far, everyone wants a seat near the table. Theories filled the room like smoke. Some proposed electromagnetic propulsion impossible at that distance from solar wind. Others suggested a natural but undiscovered phenomenon, reactive sublimation, quantum drag, magnetic memory. None fit. And then, a soft voice, belonging to a young physicist from Kyoto, broke the room's tension. She simply said, "Maybe it's waiting." The phrase landed like a small, perfect stone. What does a celestial body wait for? That question haunted the week that followed. The object's drift stopped abruptly on December 7th, freezing in a new orbit closer to Earth's plane. For the first time, it aligned precisely with our ecliptic, the invisible sheet of space along which all the planets travel. It was as if 3I Atlas had decided to join the family. The geometry was almost too poetic to be accidental. For millennia, humans have stared at the heavens and mapped their gods onto moving stars. Planets were deities in motion. Jupiter the ruler, Venus the mirror, Mars the flame. To see an unknown object align itself with those ancient wanderers was to feel myth breathing again. Telescopes caught the change immediately. The object brightened, not from heat, but from reflected sunlight, its surface now angled perfectly toward Earth, as though turning its face to us. Across observatories, people spoke in whispers. The usual language of science, angles, flux, vectors, began to sound like prayer. The data stream poured in, and with it came new oddities. The spectral lines showed faint interference patterns, inconsistent with solid rock. Something inside was absorbing and re-emitting light, not chaotically, but with rhythm, as if translating sunlight into a slower dialect. At the Deep Space Network, one engineer described the readings as the first time I've seen light hesitate. Those words captured the mood. The world was witnessing hesitation from an object millions of miles away. A pause that felt like choice. And in that hesitation, something human awakened too. Around the world, people began gathering to watch the sky at dusk. Cities dimmed their lights. Telescopes pointed upward. For the first time since the Apollo missions, the collective gaze of humanity unified toward a single moving point. Children were told bedtime stories about a wandering eye that came to rest beside our Sunday. Musicians composed pieces timed to its orbital rhythm. Artists painted spirals, mirrors, and clocks. The line between science and poetry vanished, as if the object itself demanded both languages at once. On December 9th, an unexpected signal crossed one of the European antennas, not from 3i Atlas, but from its direction. A faint, wide-band pulse, too short to decode, too structured to dismiss. The signature repeated twice, then never again. It lasted exactly 12 seconds. Was it a transmission, a coincidence, or the sound of something testing its own voice for the first time in eons? We'll never know. The data is fragmentary, corrupted by interference. But one detail stands firm. The signal's arrival matched the moment 3i Atlas reached perfect alignment with Earth. And then, silence. The object resumed its cold inertia, orbiting quietly as though nothing had ever happened. It's strange how quickly wonder becomes routine. After weeks of uproar, the world began to look away. Headlines cooled, funding shifted, attention drifted. The object remained, patient as ever, turning through sunlight with the unhurried dignity of things that remember before they think. But for those who kept watching, the feeling never faded, that subtle pressure behind the eyes, that sense that we weren't looking at the sky anymore. The sky was looking back, and if that's true, then whatever woke inside 3i Atlas hasn't gone back to sleep. It's only waiting for us to notice what else has begun to move. In the long history of listening, few moments have provoked such careful silence as the 12-second signal. It arrived without warning, during an ordinary calibration run at 2 a.m. Universal Time, on December 9th. The technician on duty, a radio engineer named Calder Shu, didn't even notice it at first. It was buried in background static broadband, low amplitude, easy to overlook. He almost cleared the buffer, almost, but something about the shape of the noise felt wrong. Signals, like fingerprints, have habits. Cosmic background hum drifts lazily. Human interference stutters. Natural phenomena crackle with randomness. This, however, was deliberate chaos. Too clean to be random, too messy to be designed. Shu isolated the burst and magnified it. 12 seconds. 3 distinct frequency shifts, symmetrical across the midpoint, like a mirror folding inward. He forwarded the file to his supervisor with the modest subject line, possible anomaly in Atlas Channel. By morning, it had reached every major observatory on the planet. The first response was bureaucratic: log, label, and dismiss. These things happen: equipment glitches, stray satellites, Earth's own emissions bouncing through the ionosphere. But as analysts combed through cross data from Chile, Japan, and the VLA in New Mexico, they found the same anomaly, same duration, same pattern, same timestamp. The signal wasn't local, it was everywhere. For 72 hours, the world's antennas had caught the same whisper. And yet, here is where the story turns inward, because when the scientists reconstructed the waveform, something odd appeared. The amplitude curve of the 12-second pulse matched the thermal profile of 3I Atlas's earlier heat pulses. Same rise, same decay, same 19-hour interval, embedded faintly within the modulation. It was as if the object had spoken in its own breath. NASA officially denied this connection, calling it a coincidental similarity of waveform. But internally, memos began to circulate with stranger implications. The signal's carrier frequency didn't originate from the direction of 3I Atlas at all. It came from behind it. That phrase "behind it" haunted the reports. Radio waves don't respect such precision. They spread. Yet triangulation placed the apparent source a few thousand kilometers offset, trailing the object like an invisible shadow. There was nothing there. No dust, no debris, just silence with coordinates. Theorists began to speculate in quiet channels. Perhaps the object wasn't the emitter, but the lens, a focusing mechanism, amplifying something older, something farther. Maybe 3I Atlas was never the source of the mystery at all, but the instrument through which it played, a forgotten device, still functioning in obedience to an ancient purpose. In the days that followed, the data was encrypted and classified. Publicly, agencies reported a non-repeatable transient event. But the independent astronomers, those who downloaded the raw data before it vanished, kept analyzing. They noticed a mathematical curiosity. When you plot the frequency drift of the 12-second signal against time, it forms a simple ratio 1 to 3 to 5. The same sequence found in hydrogen spectral lines, in music intervals, in architecture, even in human heartbeat rhythms. Coincidence? Perhaps. But to minds already saturated with mystery, it felt like composition. Dr. Kravchenko described it beautifully. It's as if the universe cleared its throat, just once, to remind us that it, too, keeps time. The internet, of course, filled in the blanks. Some claimed to hear hidden voices within the signal. Others claimed it encoded coordinates pointing toward interstellar destinations. Every fringe theory found its echo. The public named it the breath of Atlas. But the strangest detail went largely unnoticed, buried in technical footnotes. The timestamp of the signal's first detection, 2 hours and 14 seconds, UTC, coincided precisely with the moment 3I Atlas reached direct opposition with Earth and the Sunday. In that instant, the object, the planet, and the star aligned perfectly, like points on a cosmic tuning fork. If you believe in coincidence, it's a beautiful one. If you don't, it's terrifying, because in every known model, such alignment magnifies gravitational resonance. If the object were hollow, if it contained cavities tuned to specific frequencies, it could easily respond to tidal forces, singing in harmony with the solar wind. A natural instrument, waiting for the right geometry to play its note. Still, one detail refused to stay theoretical. In those 12 seconds, faint sideband harmonics appeared, tiny ripples at higher frequencies that shouldn't exist in a natural signal. When converted into audio range, they formed a pattern eerily reminiscent of a human syllable. Not words, just the shape of breath beginning to form them. Linguists were called, musicians too. Some claimed the pattern mirrored the harmonic overtone of the vowel A. Others said it was meaningless, a trick of the Fourier transform. Yet once heard, it was impossible to unhear. The sound of potential language, suspended in physics. And then, like everything in this story, it ended. No repetition, no variation. The universe coughed once and went silent again. What makes the event so haunting is not its proof, but its restraint. A lesser mystery would announce itself, demand attention, linger for interpretation. 3. Atlas did the opposite. It gave 12 seconds, then withdrew, as if teaching the oldest lesson of all, that understanding is not owed, only offered. In the aftermath, observatories returned to routine. Funding reports were filed, conferences scheduled. But the people who had heard the raw signal, who had felt the strange synchrony between data and pulse, found it hard to sleep. The echo seemed to linger not in sound, but in thought. If an object can speak once, it can speak again. If a silence can answer, it can remember. And in the months that followed, subtle anomalies began to appear in Earth's own transmissions. Tiny timing offsets in radar echoes, harmonic flutters in deep space telemetry. Some dismissed them as interference. Others whispered that perhaps the reflection had learned the shape of the voice that called to it. Because what if 3i Atlas had never been speaking at all? What if it had simply taught space itself to listen? That possibility, soft and unbearable, now hangs in every signal we send. And as we listen harder, it becomes impossible not to wonder, what if the next sound we hear is not from the stars, but from our own reflection finally answering back? It began quietly, as all great changes do. Somewhere between December and January, the world itself started to hum. No one noticed at first. The vibrations were too low, too subtle. Seismologists in Iceland thought it was geothermal interference. Oceanographers blamed pressure, anomalies beneath the Pacific. But when the same pattern appeared in Japan, Chile, and Northern Africa perfectly synchronized, repeating every 19 hours, the explanations began to crumble. The frequency was too regular, too global. Every 19 hours, a faint tremor rippled through the crust, imperceptible to humans, but unmistakable to instruments. The amplitude was microscopic, the energy minuscule, yet the pattern matched, down to the second. The pulse once recorded, within 3i Atlas. Coincidence? Perhaps. But coincidences, like gravity, gain weight when they repeat. At the Deep Space Network, technicians ran spectral analyses on the global seismographic data. The result was absurd. The waveform of the Earth's tremor aligned almost perfectly with the thermal bloom pattern of the object, millions of kilometers away. It was as if the planet had begun to breathe in the same rhythm. NASA's official stance was cautious. No evidence of external influence. But privately, the emails told a different story. One internal memo from January 2nd read, "If this correlation holds, we may be inside the feedback loop." The phrase, feedback loop, soon escaped the labs and slipped into headlines, stripped of context, fattened with fear. But what it meant was strangely beautiful. The possibility that Earth, through its oceans, magnetic field, and atmosphere, was resonating with the very object it had been studying. Two distant bodies, sharing a rhythm, like tuning forks across the void. In Geneva, Dr. Elena Kravchenko tried to explain it to reporters. "It's not communication," she said. "It's sympathy. Systems that observe one another tend to align. The universe likes harmony." Her words were quoted, misquoted, worshipped, mocked, but the data didn't care. The hum persisted. Across the world, strange side effects began to surface. Satellite instruments detected faint periodic fluctuations in the ionosphere. Deep-sea hydrophones picked up an inaudible tone beneath the ambient noise of the planet, a tone repeating every 19 hours and 41 minutes. And in observatories everywhere, the same quiet shiver passed through antenna arrays, as though they too were part of a larger orchestra warming up. Humanity was now playing in the same key as 3I Atlas. The effect wasn't constant, only cyclical. Every 19 hours, a measurable unity swept through the sensors. The planet, it seemed, had learned to echo. At first, it was eerie. Then, it was addictive. Scientists who once worked in isolation began to collaborate compulsively, as if the rhythm itself had infected their focus. A strange productivity overtook research teams. Reports were filed faster. Meetings ran longer. No one could explain it. One engineer described it as a sense that time itself is moving in waves. Meanwhile, artists, poets, and musicians felt it too. Without knowing the data, they began composing in 19-hour cycles, painting spirals, crafting sounds that pulsed with invisible timing. Somehow, humanity had started creating in resonance with something it couldn't see. The media called it the Earth Pulse. For a brief, miraculous span of weeks, the phenomenon united the species not through panic, but through tempo. And then, on January 23rd, something new appeared. In the radar data from the Arecibo backup array, faint echoes emerged from below the noise floor, not from space, but from the upper atmosphere. Signals mirroring the Atlas pulse, bouncing between ionized layers, as if the sky itself were whispering. When mapped globally, those echoes converged on 3 major nodes, one over the Pacific, one over the Sahara, and one over Antarctica. Together, they formed an enormous triangle, too vast for coincidence, too perfect for nature. Some called it a resonance network. Others feared it was something else, a kind of synchronization preparing for an unknown purpose. In closed sessions, international agencies debated intervention. Could the pulse be disrupted? Should they try? But how do you silence an echo that involves an entire planet? Dr. Kravchenko wrote one final public statement before vanishing from interviews altogether. Perhaps the worst thing we can do is assume that resonance equals danger. The Earth hums because it is listening. We should listen back. Her words lingered in documentaries and digital murals, spreading like mantras. The Earth hums because it is listening. And still, the rhythm grew stronger. By February, satellite gyroscopes began to drift slightly in tune with the 19-hour cycle. Not enough to alarm engineers, but enough to remind them that precision has a pulse. Even atomic clocks registered nanosecond irregularities, synchronized across continents. The Earth was not just resonating, it was synchronizing. Theologians called it awakening. Physicists called it phase coupling. Poets called it beautiful. And then, just as the world began to accept the hum as the new normal, it stopped. On February 10th, every seismometer on Earth went flat. Every echo fell silent. Even the ionosphere quieted as if holding its breath. The sudden absence was so absolute that some compared it to grief. After weeks of cosmic music, silence returned like a curtain closing. In that stillness, satellites recorded one final change. 3I Atlas had altered its orientation again. Its bright face, once turned toward Earth, now angled slightly away, as if acknowledging the end of a conversation. The alignment was over, but before it turned fully into shadow, it emitted one last pulse, faint, brief, and aimed not at the sun, but at the void between stars. Whatever the message, it was not for us, and yet the instruments caught a fragment, a frequency shift so gentle it resembled a sigh. We called it data, but deep down, everyone knew what it really was. A goodbye, or, perhaps, an invitation to follow. The hum had stopped, and the world noticed. Not in an immediate, cinematic way, no alarms, no breaking news, but in the gentler sense that something missing makes itself known through absence. The air felt heavier, radios sounded flatter, even the long-distance phone lines carried an inexplicable stillness. It was as though the planet had exhaled for weeks and was now holding its breath. At first, scientists tried to treat it like any other anomaly. They filled databases with timestamps, variance reports, and differential analyses, hoping that structure might soothe uncertainty. But what do you measure when the only evidence is silence? Every graph, every instrument, every metric pointed to the same blank line, an unbroken calm. It's like trying to study the pause between heartbeats, said Dr. Alan Stern, leaning over a terminal at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Something happened, but it's happening in the space between. He wasn't wrong. The absence itself had properties. The baseline hum of Earth's electromagnetic noise, usually alive with random interference, had dipped by a measurable margin. Radio astronomers began to call it the subtraction event. Whatever had been vibrating in sympathy with 3I Atlas was no longer vibrating at all. For some, this was relief. The sky had gone back to being empty. For others, it felt like heartbreak. People had adjusted to the rhythm, even if they didn't know it. The pulse had woven itself into daily life, into sleep cycles, communication patterns, even moods. When it vanished, insomnia rates spiked. Hospitals reported a curious surge in anxiety-related admissions. Humans, it seemed, had synchronized more deeply than anyone had realized. Philosophers compared it to withdrawal. "We have lost our cosmic metronome," wrote an essayist from Kyoto. "Now we must remember how to count time alone." But the data, stubborn as ever, refused to be romanticized. 3 weeks after the silence began, new anomalies surfaced this time, not in the sky, but in the archives. At the Deep Space Network, technicians discovered missing packets from the final Atlas transmission, fractions of data that had not recorded properly. Normally, such corruption means nothing, but when the fragments were reassembled, they formed a precise pattern, a spectral fade shaped like a descending curve, ending at zero. It looked like music ending. No modulation, no content, just structure, a decrescendo written in radiation. The signature was unmistakably intentional, as if the object had shut itself down with elegance. The ESA called it self-terminating emission. The public called it the farewell tone. When translated into audio, the pattern resembled a single, falling note. It lasted less than a second, low and pure, like a cello sighing across the vacuum. For days, people shared the sound online. Some said it comforted them, others said it felt like being remembered. And then, the theories began. One group insisted the silence was a sign of completion, that 3I Atlas had delivered whatever message it was built to carry, and having done so, withdrew from the conversation. Another claimed the opposite, that it was waiting for a reply, that Earth had failed to answer in time. Both interpretations spoke more about humanity than about the object. We cannot resist turning data into story, nor silence into confession. In Cambridge, Avi Loeb addressed a packed auditorium. What we call silence is often just signal we haven't learned to translate. The universe doesn't stop speaking, it merely changes dialects. His words hung in the air like scripture, because in truth, the data hadn't stopped, it had only shifted. Deep in the microwave background, faint phase irregularities began to appear. Patterns matching the Atlas pulse, stretched and softened, now resonated faintly within cosmic noise itself. It was as if the hum had been absorbed by the universe, diffused into its skin. No one could prove it. But if true, it meant something astonishing. The object's last pulse might have imprinted itself on the very field of radiation that fills all space. A message, not for Earth, but for existence. Of course, most dismiss the idea as poetic nonsense, but poetry, as it often does, outlives proof. People began to treat the silence as sacred. Pilgrims gathered on mountaintops. Radio enthusiasts aimed antennas toward the stars, listening for faint rhythms only they could hear. Some claimed to feel vibrations under their feet again. Others claimed to dream in pulses of 19 hours. The Vatican Observatory released a short statement that surprised even the scientists. If creation listens, then silence is its form of prayer. Governments ignored it. Markets forgot, but individuals didn't. Around the world, the farewell tone began to appear in symphonies, films, lullabies. Humanity had turned 12 seconds of data and 1 second of silence into a myth. And in the midst of this global reflection, a subtle change returned to the instruments. On February 28th, at exactly the same time the farewell tone had first been recorded, several deep space arrays detected a brief fluctuation in the cosmic microwave background, too faint for headlines, too symmetrical to dismiss. Its amplitude matched the echo ratio of 3I Atlas's final signal. It was not a return transmission. It was something older, deeper, like the afterimage left behind when you stare at the sun too long. The universe, it seemed, had blinked. Dr. Kravchenko summarized the sensation perfectly in her private journal. Silence is not absence. It is the echo of understanding. And so, the message of silence became the last great question. Was the object gone, dormant, or had it simply merged with the space between things, the interval where language ends and comprehension begins? Whatever the answer, the effect remained. People listened more. They spoke slower. The planet itself seemed gentler. The hum had faded, but its memory had synchronized us all. And in that synchronized quiet, the stars above felt less distant. It was as if 3I Atlas had given humanity not a warning, not a gift, but a rhythm, a way to hear time again, to measure ourselves not by progress, but by pause. Because sometimes what the cosmos says the loudest is the part it never says at all. By the middle of March, the silence had become normal. Humanity had begun to heal from wonder, to reabsorb itself into routine. Telescopes returned to their usual targets. Headlines drifted elsewhere. 3I Atlas remained in its patient orbit, dim, distant, a footnote in the grand equation of forgetfulness. Then, one night, the darkness blinked. The first report came from Cerro Paranal Observatory in Chile. A graduate student named Ines Morales, half asleep at the terminal, noticed a flicker in the deep field readings. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft swell of brightness where the object should have been invisible. She almost ignored it, assuming reflection, a stray glint of sunlight. But when she compared timestamps, her pulse quickened. The glint was impossible. 3I Atlas was behind the sun, lost to our side of the sky. It should not have been visible at all, and yet, there it was, a glow, subtle but persistent, as if the shadow itself had learned to emit. The data reached NASA within hours. Cross-verification from the Australian Sky Survey confirmed the anomaly. Something luminous was blooming just beyond Mercury's orbit, following the same vector path 3I Atlas had left months earlier. The object, it seemed, was stirring again, this time not with sound, but with light. It began faint, almost bashful, a ghostly shimmer pulsing every 19 hours, lasting 6 minutes, vanishing again. The pattern was unmistakable. The rhythm had returned, but this time, the light wasn't reflection. Spectroscopy revealed no solar component. It was self-luminous, producing energy from within. The spectrum showed narrow emission bands, consistent with ionized hydrogen, and something else, a material not yet catalogued. Physicists proposed dozens of models: stored energy release, piezoelectric discharge, magnetic resonance. None fit. The light behaved like intent, measured, deliberate, unhurried. It radiated not in all directions, but toward one, Earth. For weeks, the glow repeated, always in rhythm, always precise. And then, on April 1st, the emissions changed. Instead of a single pulse, the light fractured into 3 concentric rings, each rotating slowly within the other, like the iris of an awakening eye. The observatories froze in collective awe. Inés Morales, now permanently assigned to Atlas monitoring, described it best. It's like watching geometry think. Mathematically, the rings made no sense. The inner 2 rotated at perfect harmonic ratios, 1:3, 3:5. The same proportions hidden within the long-ago 12-second signal. Coincidence? Again. Or design, too patient to care about being recognized. When the rings stabilized, they began to drift apart. Each one followed its own micro-orbit, faint trails of ionization linking them like threads. To the naked eye, the formation resembled an unfurling flower. By then, the world had started paying attention again. News anchors called it the bloom. Artists called it the iris. The Vatican, in a moment of sublime understatement, called it unclassified luminosity of theological interest. But beyond all metaphors, what fascinated scientists was the object's restraint. The brightness never increased beyond safe observation levels. It was as if 3I Atlas were calibrating its own visibility, showing only what we could safely bear to see. Some believed this was a coincidence. Others believed it was a consideration. The pulse of light continued, steady as breath, and with every cycle, faint electromagnetic ripples reached Earth, subtle enough to register only on the most sensitive instruments. The frequencies matched those of human alpha brainwaves. Coincidence? Again. Or, perhaps, the universe's most intimate echo. Psychologists began to notice curious patterns. People who meditated during the Atlas cycles reported vivid dreams, geometric landscapes, spirals, and mirrors of light. A handful described standing before a vast circular door that never opened. None of this was scientifically verifiable, yet the synchronicity unnerved even the rational. On April 19th, the emissions shifted color softly, imperceptibly, from silver to pale blue. The hydrogen lines cooled, suggesting lower energy states. It was as though the object had entered a tranquil phase, its own version of rest. In this quiet luminescence, the world found a new kind of fascination. Observatories live-streamed the cycles. People around the globe synced their sleep to its rhythm, and an entire subculture of Atlas watchers began keeping vigil through the night. believing the light carried messages in its flicker. NASA publicly denied any evidence of communication. Privately, the scientists argued among themselves. A small but vocal faction proposed that 3i Atlas had transitioned from passive reflection to active transmission, that it had learned from our observation, and now sought to continue the exchange on a new wavelength. Visible compassion. It was a poetic idea, one that made engineers roll their eyes and poets cry. Still, one fact remained unshakable. The light was responding. On April 29th, an experimental laser at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, testing adaptive optics calibration, accidentally fired in the object's direction. Exactly 6 minutes later, the inner ring of Atlas brightened in sync with the pulse. The odds of coincidence were astronomical. It wasn't communication, not in any formal sense, no words, no symbols, no modulation, but it was awareness. Something out there was not just reflecting light, it was reciprocating. For one shining week, it felt like the dawn of something vast and gentle. And then, on May 7th, the rings contracted, the luminosity dimmed, the pattern began to change. Spectral analysis showed a gradual shift toward shorter wavelengths. Violet, then ultraviolet light, we could no longer see. The object was vanishing not by distance, but by dimension, climbing into frequencies beyond human sight. It wasn't dying, it was ascending. The final observation, logged by Morales herself, described the last visible pulse as a slow closing of an enormous eye. After that, 3i Atlas was gone from all optical ranges, leaving only infrared residue, a ghost of warmth fading into the void. For the first time since it arrived, it no longer reflected anything, not even sunlight. It had folded itself back into shadow. But the instruments didn't go silent. Deep in the radio noise, a faint whisper remained a beat every 19 hours, buried so low it barely existed. Whatever had awakened was still awake, just quieter now, watching from wavelengths we could only imagine. And so, the world waited again, half hopeful, half afraid. Because if 3i Atlas had truly learned to listen, then the next signal would not come from it. It would come from us. In the weeks following the disappearance of the Atlas light, something remarkable began to unfold, not in the sky, but within us. The silence of space had turned the world into an audience of listeners, and when the last visible shimmer vanished, humanity filled the void with meaning. It was not panic this time, nor worship, nor denial. It was reflection. Across continents, people began to build quiet places, rooftop observatories, mirrored circles in fields, silent vigils beside old radio towers. No banners, no slogans, just gatherings of those who had watched the light and felt something vast staring gently back. Psychologists called it the Atlas effect, a phenomenon where large populations experienced elevated empathy and contemplative behavior following exposure to the object's broadcasts. Statistically, crime dropped. Volunteerism increased. Even markets seemed calmer, as though the pulse had bled into economics, reminding humanity to breathe in cycles again. No one could prove causation, of course, yet every social model agreed something had changed. Philosophers proposed that the event had created a new kind of global myth, one rooted not in fear or domination, but in the awe of symmetry. We had seen an intelligence, or perhaps a mirror, and instead of demanding to conquer or decode it, we had simply learned to sit in its presence. Dr. Kravchenko, emerging from months of seclusion, gave a single interview in early June. She looked older, softer, almost at peace. We are so used to wanting answers, she said. But maybe questions are how the universe speaks to itself. Maybe 3i Atlas was just the echo of our own curiosity, returning home. Her words resonated. Books, songs, and films bloomed from that one sentence. Universities began offering courses titled Listening to the Cosmos. Meditation apps played the faint, reconstructed Atlas pulse beneath their ambient tracks. Artists began creating with deliberate pauses, compositions designed to include silence as an instrument. Something about the world slowed beautifully. The planet had learned patience, and yet, in the background, scientists kept watching. They couldn't not. The instruments still detected a heartbeat, low and slow, 19 hours apart. It was too faint for mainstream press, too irregular for theory, but those who noticed began calling it the sleeping breath. By July, new data arrived, not from space, but from beneath the sea. The hydrophone networks of the Pacific Ocean, originally built to detect submarines and seismic shifts, began recording faint pulses echoing through the deep pressure waves, with the same rhythm as the Atlas heartbeat. It was impossible. The oceans were vibrating in the same tempo as something light years away. At first, governments classified the findings. Then leaks emerged, as they always do. The public, now fluent in cosmic wonder, didn't panic. They simply listened harder. Theorists speculated that the ocean's resonance was a form of sympathetic vibration, the Earth completing its dialogue with whatever 3i Atlas had been. But a smaller group proposed something stranger. They suggested that 3i Atlas had left a seed not physical, but informational, that through resonance, it had imprinted a frequency pattern into Earth's magnetic field, a kind of signature woven into the planet's electromagnetic skin, invisible, subtle, permanent. To most, this sounded mystical. To a few, it sounded like science we hadn't learned yet. The phenomenon soon inspired new branches of art and research. Musicians tuned their compositions to the Atlas frequency. Architects began designing structures with spiral geometry that echoed the object's light rings. Even language shifted. Phrases like "stay in phase" or "find your frequency" slipped naturally into speech. The world hadn't merely witnessed an alien event, it had metabolized it. Meanwhile, small communities of resonance, as they came to be known, claimed they could sense the pulse directly through dreams, sensations, or sudden moments of quiet knowing. Whether psychosomatic or profound, their testimonies carried a consistent tone: peace. They described no messages, no revelations, just a feeling of being gently understood. That, more than anything, defined the human response, the sense that the universe might not be hostile or indifferent, but quietly attentive. And perhaps, in that attention, we recognized ourselves for the first time. Sociologists called it the first global introspection. For the first time since history began, every culture, language, and belief system shared one mystery and one silence. The event didn't unify politics or erase suffering, it did something subtler. It reminded us that awe is the one emotion that requires no translation. Children born during that year would later be called the Atlas generation. They grew up under a quieter sky, one where telescopes were as revered as temples, and curiosity was considered a form of faith. For them, the mystery wasn't about aliens or gods. It was about reflection, the idea that existence itself might be an echo chamber, each mind a tiny atlas, turning light into thought and thought back into light. By August, the hum beneath the oceans began to fade. Seismographs flattened. The 19-hour pulse dissolved once more into background randomness. And yet, humanity didn't grieve this time. We understood that endings, too, are part of the pattern. On the final night of the resonance, observatories recorded a faint aurora above both poles, a ribbon of pale blue light, curling in silent synchronization. The shape was unmistakable, a spiral, the same geometry carved through every phase of the phenomenon, now painted across our atmosphere like a closing signature. Dr. Stern called it the most polite farewell in history, but others believed it wasn't a farewell at all, because at the spiral's core, for just a few minutes before dawn, sensors detected a narrowband signal, weak, almost lost, but unmistakably artificial. When decoded into visual form, it revealed nothing more than a shape, 3 concentric circles, nested gently like ripples. It was neither a word nor a command. It was a reminder that in all our listening, in all our reaching outward, what we find is ourselves reflected through the patience of the stars. The cosmos had spoken once more, not to instruct, but to remember, and in that remembering, humanity found its stillness again. By late autumn of 2026, nearly a year after the object first entered human awareness, the data had stopped changing, but our interpretation hadn't. Scientists, artists, theologians, and dreamers still circled the same question, like planets around a faint sun. What was it? The answer, when it finally took shape, wasn't a discovery. It was a confession. At a conference held in Geneva, part physics symposium, part quiet vigil, Dr. Elena Kravchenko stood before a room of 200 people and said, softly, maybe it was never an object at all. Maybe it was a reflection. The phrase landed like a stone in still water. A reflection? The audience leaned forward. Kravchenko elaborated, her voice measured, her hands trembling slightly. Everything about 3i Atlas behaved like a mirror. It responded to observation, amplified resonance, reflected signal, and synchronized rhythm. It never spoke, only echoed. Every anomaly correlated directly with our act of watching. It was not showing us itself, it was showing us ourselves. The theory was radical, but beautiful. She called it the mirror hypothesis, the idea that 3i Atlas was less a visitor and more a kind of space-time lens, a structure woven into the universe's fabric that activates only in the presence of conscious observation. In this model, consciousness and matter are not separate. Observation doesn't just measure the universe, it completes it. Like a mirror requiring an eye to be seen, 3i Atlas required awareness to exist as anomaly. Without us, it might have remained just another rock. With us, it became meaning. A small ripple of applause moved through the room. Some smiled, others frowned. Physicists whispered about quantum coherence, decoherence, the double-slit experiment, the idea that the act of measurement collapses reality into certainty. But this was something more poetic. It wasn't about particles, it was about attention itself. The idea spread like light. Journalists coined terms, the cosmic mirror, the Atlas effect, the consciousness feedback model. Talk shows misquoted it into mysticism. But the real thinkers, the philosophers and neuroscientists and theoretical physicists, recognized something deeper. For decades, physics had been tiptoeing toward the notion that observation changes reality. Quantum fields behave differently when seen. Entropy decreases in systems under measurement. Maybe the cosmos needs awareness, like lungs need air. The mirror theory turned that speculation into architecture. It proposed that structures like 3i Atlas could exist throughout the universe, self-organizing nodes of matter, designed to awaken only when observed, functioning as tests of awareness. When a species develops the technology and curiosity to notice them, they respond, creating feedback that reflects the species' own state of consciousness. Not communication, reflection. If true, then 3i Atlas wasn't the first message from beyond. It was the universe's own questionnaire, written in geometry and silence. A cosmic Rorschach test asking, "What do you see when you look at me?" Some saw alien intelligence, others saw natural beauty, most saw themselves. In the weeks after the conference, the mirror theory spread beyond academia. It entered art, music, and religion. Buddhist monks compared it to the concept of Indra's net, an ancient idea that every jewel in the cosmos reflects every other. Christian mystics spoke of it as the imago mundi, the world made in the image of perception. A rabbi in Jerusalem wrote, "Perhaps God is not a being that watches, but the act of watching itself." Even NASA, cautious as ever, released a statement that bordered on poetry. Observation remains the universe's most powerful interaction. But the theory's most profound consequence wasn't metaphysical, it was personal. People began to practice what they called intentional observation. Not telescopes, but attention. To look at things water, faces, trees, with the same reverence once reserved for stars. If the cosmos mirrored awareness, then to observe kindly was to shape kindly. Small movements formed, the reflective age, they called it. Schools taught children to listen to silence as data. Artists left canvases blank, inviting viewers to see themselves. Scientists began collaborating with philosophers again, rediscovering that awe could be a form of research. Even politics shifted. For the first time in centuries, the United Nations opened a session not with an anthem, but with 60 seconds of shared quiet. "To remember what listens," the Secretary General said, and still, some doubted. Skeptics argued the mirror theory was romantic mysticism masquerading as physics. "A reflection can't move," one astronomer protested. "It can't pulse, can't alter orbits." But Kravchenko countered gently. "It didn't move. We did. Our perception shifted, and the data followed. The mirror didn't travel across space, it revealed where we already were." The deeper implication frightened even her. If observation can create anomalies, then what else might our collective attention be shaping? The idea that humanity could influence space-time by awareness alone sounded absurd until physicists remembered that even gravity bends when light looks at it. So maybe the absurd was simply the unacknowledged obvious. The more people studied the records, the clearer the symmetry became. Every major shift in 3i Atlas's behavior coincided with changes in human focus. The first thermal pulses, when observation intensified, the orbital alignment, when the world's gaze united, the final bloom, when humanity grew quiet together. The data, stripped of narrative, told the same story as myth. It moved when we did. That revelation changed how scientists described the universe. They began to see it not as a collection of things, but as a conversation, a dynamic between perception and matter. By the following year, universities offered courses titled Conscious Cosmology. Students wrote theses about feedback consciousness, resonance fields, participatory physics. What began as a mystery in the sky became a mirror for human evolution. Perhaps that was the point all along, to remind us that every question we ask the universe is answered in the form of another question. To remind us that intelligence may not arrive in ships, but in silence. And to remind us that when we stare long enough into the unknown, we are not discovering it. We are waking it up. Or maybe we are waking up together. Because mirrors don't show strangers, they show witnesses. And if 3i Atlas truly was the cosmos looking back, then the age of loneliness in science had quietly ended. For the first time, Humanity wasn't alone in the conversation, because it had finally learned that to listen deeply enough is already to belong. It began, as most revolutions do, with a meeting no one thought would matter. In early February of 2027, a small consortium of scientists gathered in a dim conference hall in Geneva, the same hall where Dr. Kravchenko had first uttered the words, "Maybe it was a reflection." The walls still smelled faintly of chalk and ozone. Outside, snow fell in a rhythm too coincidental to ignore. Inside, humanity prepared to look at the universe on purpose. They called it Project Quiet. Its premise was simple. If observation truly influenced 3i Atlas, then perhaps observation itself could be measured as a force, not through instruments or lasers, but through synchronized attention. 1 billion minds, focused on a single idea, the cosmic equivalent of a controlled experiment in consciousness. It was audacious, ridiculous, beautiful. The plan was scheduled for March 19th, timed precisely to the anniversary of the object's first recorded light. For 20 minutes, at a coordinated moment, participants around the globe would pause. No broadcasting, no speaking, no light pollution. A collective act of silence directed toward the coordinates where 3i Atlas once shone. The scientific community split in two. The skeptics called it theater, the believers called it data, but both agreed that if the mirror theory held any truth, this would be the only meaningful test. As the date approached, the experiment grew beyond academia. Schools joined, cities dimmed their lights, airlines adjusted flight paths, religious leaders called it the listening hour. Even world governments, in rare cooperation, declared a temporary radio silence. On March 19th, at precisely 21 UTC, the planet fell quiet. For the first time in recorded history, nearly every artificial signal ceased. No broadcasts, no advertisements, no static chatter of civilization. The Earth exhaled, and space listened. Imagine it. Satellites orbiting in mute elegance, oceans still, servers cooling into sleep. A globe of 7 billion minds holding one thought: listen. To most, nothing happened. The stars looked the same. The darkness stayed dark. But in observatories scattered across the hemisphere, instruments began to twitch. First, the magnetometers, a soft fluctuation, rhythmic but faint, sweeping through the Earth's magnetic field. Then the seismograph's tiny pulses, no stronger than a breath, emerging every 19 hours, exactly as before. And then came the light. At 21:12 UTC, telescopes in Chile and Spain simultaneously detected a shimmer where none should be. Not bright, but definite, a silver thread weaving through the background sky. It didn't move like a comet or star. It shimmered, paused, shimmered again. 3 pulses, and then darkness. The reaction was global. Astronomers swore under their breath. Engineers cried in disbelief. Journalists, breaking their vow of silence, began to whisper across emergency channels. The data arrived as clean as starlight. 3 sequential flashes, perfectly spaced 19 hours apart, the same interval that had defined the entire phenomenon. NASA released a single statement the next morning. A transient optical event, consistent with previous 3i Atlas coordinates, has been observed. Analysis ongoing. But no analysis could contain the wave of awe that followed. In homes, cafes, temples, people replayed the light sequence recorded from ground-based observatories. It lasted only a few seconds, but carried the gravity of centuries. Humanity had listened, and the cosmos had nodded. Was it coincidence? Instrumental artifact? Hope hallucinating itself? Maybe. But as one physicist remarked, coincidences don't come with timestamps. The data was reviewed for months. The timing of the pulses aligned within a margin of error too slim for chance. The frequency of the Earth's own magnetic resonance had shifted microscopically during the event, as though the planet had tuned itself, briefly, to match the sky. No one could explain it. The mirror theory's supporters smiled quietly. Its critics fell silent. Meanwhile, the world reacted not with triumph, but with tenderness. The experiment's success, or its illusion, didn't feel like discovery. It felt like intimacy. People described it as a cosmic acknowledgement, a nod between observer and observed. The universe hadn't revealed its secrets. It had simply reminded us that it heard. Dr. Kravchenko, ever humble, refused interviews. She wrote one last message before vanishing into the mountains. We have confirmed the simplest truth, that awareness is participatory. We do not witness the cosmos, we join it. Her sentence was adopted by textbooks, then by monuments, then by murals across cities. A new era of quiet wonder began, a science that didn't rush to dissect mystery, but to dwell in it. Still, the data had one final secret. Buried deep in the analysis of the light pulses was a faint modulation, a sub-pattern repeating inside each flash. It wasn't Morse, not binary, but it held structure, alternating wave intervals forming a geometric ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. When converted into image form, the ratio mapped a simple outline, an arc bending back upon itself, reflecting its own shape. A mirror. It wasn't proof. It wasn't message. It was symbol, one that seemed to whisper, "You were right to look." For weeks after, the observatories kept scanning, but the light never returned. 3i Atlas remained absent, its coordinates empty but strangely alive. Some scientists swore they could still feel interference in their instruments, like a faint gravitational hum, too quiet to measure, yet impossible to ignore. In time, the world let go. Life resumed its rhythm. The experiment became legend, a gentle footnote in history's long story of wonder. But every so often, at 19-hour intervals, minor magnetic deviations still appear in the planet's data logs, small enough to dismiss, steady enough to remember. Whether natural, engineered, or imagined, the outcome was the same. Humanity had conducted its greatest experiment, and the result was not proof, but peace. And maybe that was the answer 3i Atlas had been offering all along, that the final step of discovery isn't revelation, it's recognition. That every time we look up, we are already being seen. That awareness, shared across the void, is the oldest form of contact, and that perhaps the reason the stars are silent is because they are still listening for us to finish speaking. The night sky has always been a paradox. It is filled with light, yet it feels like absence. We stare into it and call it silence, but what we are really hearing is distance, a conversation stretched so far across time that words turn into radiation. Months passed after Project Quiet. 3i Atlas remained invisible, unresponsive, a line of memory on charts that no longer flickered. The world moved on, but not as before. Humanity had touched something wordless, and wordlessness has gravity. Observatories still turned their mirrors toward its last known coordinates, not expecting data, but out of devotion. Astronomers began calling the region the listening field. It became a kind of scientific monastery, instruments running, notes being taken, but everyone knowing the true work was reverence. Children born after the event grew up with bedtime stories about the mirror that taught the world to listen. They would ask, "What did it say?" And their parents would answer, "Everything we already knew, but forgot to believe." For the first time in centuries, exploration slowed down. Space programs continued, but their goals softened. The race for conquest became a pilgrimage for understanding. Humanity's gaze, once sharp and territorial, had learned humility. The cosmos was no longer an opponent or a frontier. It was a companion. The great silence became a new field of study, not absence, but the language of stillness itself. Physicists began to model quiet as an active state. Quantum vacuums, vibrating with potential. Cosmic microwave background murmuring faint echoes of creation. Silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with waiting. And in that waiting, something subtle began to shift. The radio arrays on Earth and orbiting satellites started detecting micro-fluctuations in the cosmic background minute, harmonic ripples repeating every 19 hours. They were faint, almost beneath perception, yet their rhythm was unmistakable. The signature of 3I Atlas, embedded now not in one corner of the solar system, but everywhere. The universe had learned the pattern. It was as if the object, before disappearing, had exhaled a final breath that never stopped traveling, a wave of structure, expanding quietly at the speed of light, turning all of space into mirror. Some called it the Atlas field. Others refused to name it, as though naming might reduce it to something manageable. Whatever it was, it meant the phenomenon had never truly ended. The conversation had simply changed medium. NASA confirmed the data publicly, though cautiously. Persistent low-frequency harmonics, consistent with prior Atlas resonance, detected across multiple observatories. No further comment. But philosophers didn't need data to understand what it meant. For millennia, we'd wondered why the universe seemed so quiet, why no other voices had ever reached us. The famous Fermi paradox, "Where is everybody?" haunted generations. Maybe, they began to say, we'd been misunderstanding the question. Maybe the universe isn't quiet because nothing's there. Maybe it's quiet because everything's listening. The great silence isn't the absence of conversation. It's the etiquette of consciousness. Every civilization that reaches awareness learns the same truth, that noise destroys reflection. So they stop shouting. They begin to listen. Perhaps 3I Atlas was the oldest of them, a civilization's last whisper, turned into a mirror, teaching newcomers how to join the silence. The idea spread like light through philosophy departments, through monasteries, through late-night talk shows where tired hosts spoke softly for the first time. Maybe, one said, the reason we can't hear the universe is because we haven't learned how to be quiet enough. It was hard to argue with that. By 2028, the 19-hour ripple had been confirmed across multiple cosmic instruments. The rhythm had no source. It was everywhere at once. No directional vector, no fall-off, no origin. Just presence, a kind of universal heartbeat. When converted into sound, it resembled a low hum, steady and kind, the same frequency the Earth once echoed, the same timing that had guided every phase of the phenomenon. The planet itself seemed to remember. In that remembrance, something beautiful happened. The world synchronized. No formal decree, no announcement, just small, aligned acts, power grids, briefly dimming to match the cosmic cycle, people meditating, oceans calm, data transmissions pausing, a pulse not commanded but invited. And for the first time since language began, there was no difference between science and prayer. Dr. Kravchenko, long vanished into reclusion, sent one last message to her colleagues. We are no longer studying the mirror, we are inside it. Her words became the quiet epitaph of the event. They were engraved on observatory walls, whispered in classrooms, printed on the inside covers of textbooks, because that was the realization the great silence wasn't waiting beyond the stars. It was the medium of our own consciousness, the quiet space between questions and answers. 3i Atlas had not arrived to reveal itself. It had arrived to reveal us. And maybe it still is. Sometimes, late at night, telescopes catch faint distortions in the coordinates, once occupied by the object, shimmering arcs of light that disappear when instruments try to focus. Engineers call it lensing, dreamers call it breathing. The cosmos, it seems, hasn't entirely gone back to sleep. If you listen now, really listen beneath the static of the world, you can almost feel it, that slow, patient rhythm beneath thought itself. 19 hours, 19 heartbeats, 19 rotations of something invisible and infinite. And in that rhythm, there's no fear, only participation. Because the great silence isn't an end. It's an invitation, the moment when the universe hands us the microphone and waits to see what kind of story we'll tell next. So tonight, if you find yourself awake under the dark, remember this. Silence isn't what happens when sound ends. It's what allows sound to mean anything at all. And maybe, somewhere, 3i Atlas is still listening, not from a distance, but from within the quiet between your breaths. And so, the sky returns to silence, not because it has nothing left to say, but because it has already said everything in the language of light. We listened, we wondered, we learned to be quiet. Our ancestors survived chaos, hunger, and soup that could kill you, and still, they looked up. Tonight, you do the same. One small heartbeat inside the great silence. Rest there. Let the universe hold the weight for a while. History bends, but never breaks. The stars are patient, the mirrors are kind, and the story keeps listening back.